Chapter 3765. The Wind Clan's primogenitors' heavenly Tao incarnation actually summoned the 9 heavens astral wind. With the support of the Wind Clan's primogenitors' heavenly Tao incarnation, this kind of wind elemental wind could easily destroy a quasi-supreme. Within the 9 heavens astral wind, invisible wind patterns interweaved. It was impossible to see wind patterns with the naked eye. The power of the wind Tao had always been known for its strangeness. It came and went without a trace, making it impossible to guard against it. However, the wind also had a nemesis, the earth. No matter how the wind howled, it wouldn't budge. At this moment, Gu Fei activated the power of the earth. Endless earth qi rose from the earth, and the thick earth qi immediately obstructed the power of the wind tribulation. The endless earth qi seemed to have condensed into an unshakable earth, as if a part of the earth had risen. As the earth qi rose into the air, the power of the 9 heavens astral wind was dispersed. Moreover, the dusky earth qi spread out, making it impossible for the Wind Clan's ancestor to hide. A hideous creature appeared under the shroud of the earth qi. Die! Gu Fei bellowed. Boundless earthen qi instantly gathered on his right hand, and a Halran Gaia appeared in his hand. Without any hesitation, he slashed at the creature shrouded in earthen qi. Swoosh! The Halran Gaia was invincible. It directly cut through the void, and the sword light flashed by, actually splitting the creature in half with a single strike. Success! Gu Fei couldn't help but be surprised and overjoyed. After slashing the Wind Sovereign's heaven's incarnation, the wind tribulation would dissipate. However, before Gu Fei could finish his joy, the strange beast dissipated in the void. In the next moment, the strange beast appeared in the blurry earth qi again. What's going on? Gu Fei couldn't help but be shocked. Wasn't it going to return to the heaven's path after being sliced in half by his sword? How could it condense into a form? This fella is quite capable. The disheveled old man had been watching from the side and didn't make a move. At this moment, he had to remind Gu Fei. Stinking brat, this guy is already an arrow at the end of its flight. Put in more effort. The disheveled old man continued. Just help me deal with him, Gu Fei said in annoyance. Haha, it's better if you settle it yourself. The disheveled old man laughed out loud. This was only the 3rd wave of the heavens tribulation. There were still 6 more waves, and he had plenty of opportunities to strike. Therefore, there was no rush. This fellow. Gu Fei shook his head helplessly. At this moment, the ancestor of the Wind Clan was already pouncing towards him. The strange beast was like a gust of wind. Everywhere it passed, the thick earth qi in the surroundings was blown away. Good heavens, is he going all out? Since the disheveled old man did not make a move, Gu Fei had no choice but to do it himself. The next moment, the power of earth burst forth from his body. In fact, he had already grasped most of the mysteries of the 5 elements. Roar! An extremely shocking roar resounded in the void. 9 gigantic dragon shadows appeared around Gu Fei. These were the great earth dragons. They were formed completely from the power of earth, and each of them was much larger than a mountain range. The 9 dragon shadows were like 9 ancestral veins of the earth, circling between the heavens and earth. Even the spectators outside the heavens tribulation could see this scene. Under the extreme tribulation clouds that shrouded the entire area, 9 huge dragons suddenly emerged. The aura emitted from each of the dragons was so strong that even the incarnations of the extreme supremes could not help but be moved. The 9 dragons roared into the sky. A violent aura of the extreme Tao emanated from the terrifying dragon shadows, causing the entire world to tremble and tremble. What's going on? The spectators outside the heavens tribulation were all dumbfounded. They watched this scene with their mouths agape. Everyone was nervous to the extreme. Especially those quasi-supreme beings, they were staring at the 9 terrifying dragon shadows below the heavenly tribulation. Any one of these 9 dragons could easily crush a quasi-supreme being. Gu Fei had already passed the first 2 waves of the extreme Tao heavenly tribulation. His body had already condensed a trace of the extreme Tao power. His martial body carried a trace of the aura that only a true extreme supremes would have. He was already invincible among his peers. Now, He could even crush all existences that were not extreme supremes. Even Kang Q and those fake supremes could be easily killed. It's only the third wave of the heavens tribulation and it already has such power. If he succeeds, won't he be able to do whatever he wants in the primogenitor realm? At this moment, the dozen extreme supremes were communicating with their spiritual wills. Old ancestor Yingtian was merely the founding ancestor of a second-rate force. Even if he had a heaven-defying encounter, his cultivation wouldn't suddenly become so strong that he would dare to go to the primogenitor mountain range to undergo the heavens tribulation. After all, who would dare to enter the primogenitor mountain range to undergo the heavens tribulation without at least 50% confidence? As for the extreme supremes of the primogenitor realm, they more or less knew some secrets about the primogenitor mountain range. The primogenitor mountain range was the source of the Earth ancestor vein of the entire primogenitor realm. In terms of the age of the Earth ancestor vein's existence, there wasn't any world that had an Earth ancestor vein that was older than the Earth ancestor vein of the primogenitor realm. The Earth ancestor vein of the primogenitor realm was the most ancient Earth ancestor vein in the entire universe. Legend had it that terrifying life forms were still being nurtured in the depths of the Earth ancestor vein. However, even the extreme supremes of the primogenitor realm didn't dare to enter the Earth ancestor vein of the primogenitor mountain range. That was because a supreme had completely disappeared after entering the Earth ancestor vein, never to return. Hence, from then on, the Earth ancestor vein of the primogenitor realm became a forbidden area for the supremes of the primogenitor realm. In the entire primogenitor realm, extreme supremes were definitely existences that could do whatever they wanted. However, in this boundless universe, there were also many places that even extreme supremes didn't dare to set foot in. In the primogenitor realm, there were still things that could terrify extreme supremes. One had to know that even among extreme supremes, there were differences in strength between them. Although it was rare for supremes to fight, it wasn't absolute. In the primogenitor realm, there was a shocking incident where extreme supremacy had fallen. "Can't we let him succeed?" one of the extreme supremes probed. One had to know that the consequences of causing karma with someone undergoing a tribulation were very serious. All the extreme supremes could already tell that the person undergoing the tribulation was faintly emitting an aura that made even their hearts palpitate. It was obvious that the person undergoing the tribulation had prepared an extremely powerful backup plan to deal with any accidents that might occur during the tribulation. That person definitely had the protection of an extreme supremacy. Who would be willing to offend a mysterious and unfathomable extreme supremacy? None of the supreme beings said anything. None of them were fools. They knew that they couldn't say something like that out loud. Otherwise, the supreme beings guarding the other side would definitely sense it. Chapter 3766. Extreme supremes had a mysterious sense of their own karma. Those supremes instinctively felt that if the existence in the primogenitor mountain range successfully passed the sovereign heavenly tribulation, it would be a threat to them. Some extreme supremes could even deduce the cause and effect through secret techniques. Of course, they had to pay a huge price. Some extreme supremes instinctively felt threatened, but they couldn't tell where this threat came from. All they knew was that they couldn't let the fellow in the primogenitor mountain range successfully pass the tribulation. However, no one would say it out loud. The karma involved was too great. Making a move during someone else's tribulation would definitely result in a life-or-death situation. No one was willing to get involved with such karma. The extreme supremes didn't move, but an invisible black hand was pushing something. At this moment, Ji Fei didn't know that other threats besides the heavenly tribulation were approaching him. The disheveled old man didn't expect that someone would dare to plot against Ji Fei at this time. One had to know that the sovereign heavenly tribulation was no joke. If one was affected by the heavenly tribulation, the outcome would definitely be tragic. At this moment, Ji Fei went all out. 9 earth elemental dragons formed by the power of the earth rushed down from the sky and pounced on the Wind Clan ancestors' Heaven Path incarnation. An unimaginably powerful earth elemental force erupted. The Wind Clan ancestors' Heaven Path incarnation seemed to be stuck in the mud, and his movements actually slowed down. The Wind Clan ancestor wasn't a human, but an extremely ancient living being. No one knew how long he had lived, but the heaven path imprint he left on the heaven path incarnation was still extremely powerful even after countless years. However, the primogenitor realm definitely didn't lack supreme figures who cultivated the Wind Great Tao. Over the years, there were definitely people who challenged the Wind clan ancestors' heaven path imprint. That was because Gu Fei discovered that there was a bloody hole in the middle of the ancient living being's brows, and blood was seeping out. Of course, this was only the heaven path imprint incarnation and not the real Wind clan ancestor. However, everything was so realistic that it could be mistaken for the real one. At this moment, the Wind clan ancestor roared into the sky. His body suddenly enlarged, and he stood up from the ground. The entire valley only reached his calves. The Wind clan's ancestor was extremely ferocious. He reached out with both hands and grabbed the two dragons that were charging at him. Then, he smashed the two dragons together. Boom! With a loud bang, the two dragons exploded and turned into two streams of earth essence, dissipating in the void. At the same time, the remaining 7 dragons charged forward. 2 dragons entangled the Wind clan ancestor's body, 4 dragons entangled the Wind clan ancestor's limbs, and the last dragon bit the Wind clan ancestor's head. Roar! The progenitor of the Feng clan roared in fury. This ancient beast trembled as the power of the wind calamity erupted. The formless wind actually blew away the scales of the dragon coiled around him. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, revealing bones. The 7 great earthen dragons were also fighting with all their might. Even though the power of the wind calamity had reduced them to their skeletal bodies, they still tightly bound the Wind clan progenitor. However, the Wind clan ancestor's embodiment of Heaven's Way was extremely powerful. In the next moment, an even more powerful wave of energy erupted from the Wind clan ancestor. This time, the 7 giant dragons that were coiling around the Wind clan's ancestor actually crumbled. The progenitor of the Wind clan was enraged. The boundless power of the wind tribulation erupted from his body and dispersed the essence of the earth around him. At this moment, Gu Fei suddenly appeared and stabbed the bloody hole between the Wind clan ancestor's eyebrows with his sword. Roar! The Wind clan ancestor let out an earth-shattering roar. Then, as if someone had cast a spell on him, he stood there motionlessly. After Gu Fei's 9 heaven stars sword stabbed between the Wind clan ancestor's eyebrows, a crack appeared there. It was like the most exquisite porcelain had been smashed. Waves of power of the wind calamity seeped out from the crack. Gu Fei only felt an invisible wind rushing towards him. His face hurt as if it was cut by a knife. Gu Fei wanted to pull out the 9 heaven stars sword from between the Wind clan ancestor's eyebrows. However, his hand sank and he couldn't pull it out. At this moment, countless cracks appeared on the Wind clan ancestor's body. An extremely violent power of the wind calamity was about to explode. Gu Fei let go and decisively retreated. Boom! With a loud bang, the Wind clan's ancestor's heavenly path embodiment actually exploded. This explosion was extremely terrifying. Boundless wind calamity power erupted in an instant. This was simply like an existence that was infinitely close to the extreme grade suddenly self-destructing. The earth elemental power that enveloped the entire valley was blown away. The vast power of the wind calamity blew Gu Fei away. Even with the protection of the sky blue immortal golden battle armor, his chaotic primordial martial constitution was still severely injured. Half of his body was blown away. His clothes were tattered, but no blood seeped out. At Gu Fei's level of cultivation, it was impossible for his blood essence to leak out. It would only condense in his body. This guy, Gu Fei, flew out for tens of miles and crashed into the layer of divine light that the disheveled old man had set up. He then rebounded and fell to the ground. At this moment, the power of the disheveled old man's formation finally showed. The extremely terrifying power of the wind calamity was blocked by the power of the formation. Rumble! The void that was enveloped by the formation shook violently. The void that was enveloped by the formation was collapsing and annihilating. The entire valley disappeared, leaving only a bottomless hole. The horrifying destructive power spread out in all directions. Seeing this, Gu Fei couldn't help but change his expression. Just as he was about to be enveloped by the power of destruction, a divine light suddenly descended from the sky. Boom! The ground shook and an ancient monument appeared in front of him. This was the Three Boundaries Monument. The Three Boundaries Monument emitted a ball of divine light that enveloped him and blocked the terrifying power of the wind calamity. The Three Boundaries Monument was frantically devouring Gu Fei's power. The power it released was extremely powerful and easily blocked the mighty power of destruction. I don't have much, but I have a lot of extreme saint weapons. Wait, why does the Three Boundaries Monument need his power to activate? Old man, come out. I promise I won't beat you to death. Gu Fei suddenly roared at the sky. The god of the mountain and river cauldron was too lazy. He didn't want to use any strength at all. For the fastest and most up-to-date novel reading, please visit Chapter 3767. Gu Fei was extremely frustrated. The mountain river cauldron's god could have used the three-boundary stele if he wanted to, but he had to force him to pay for it. The three-boundary stele was actually devouring his power and using it to activate it. Old man, you win. Gu Fei waved his fist and roared at the sky. Brat, I'm helping you. Don't be ungrateful. The disheveled old man was hopping mad. Why didn't this guy understand his efforts? In fact, he was slacking off, and he was slacking off openly. Gu Fei couldn't say anything about it. Got it, got it. Gu Fei was speechless. Even if he knew that the disheveled old man was slacking off, there was nothing he could do. The other party would definitely have all sorts of reasons to refute him. In the end, it would definitely be his fault. It's good that you know. Me. The disheveled old man's voice rang in Gu Fei's heart. At this moment, the wind tribulation dissipated. A weak heavenly Tao imprint rushed out of the dust and soil. It broke through the sky and returned to the heavenly Tao. Seeing this, Gu Fei couldn't help but smile. This time, he had found the right opportunity to injure the Wind Clan ancestors' heavenly Tao incarnation. The power of the heavenly Tao imprint would naturally be greatly reduced. This way, the chances of others activating the heavenly Tao imprint in the future would increase. Gu Fei was benefiting all the tribulation transcenders that came after him. At this moment, Gu Fei's heavenly tribulation still showed no signs of disappearing. Not only did it not disappear, but the power of the heavenly tribulation was actually increasing. The area enveloped by the heavenly tribulation had truly become a no-go zone. Even the spirit consciousness incarnations of the extreme grade supremes that were watching the show outside the heaven realm couldn't help but retreat, unwilling to be affected by the power of the heavenly tribulation. They were only spirit consciousness incarnations, not even the true incarnations of the extreme grade supremes. If they were affected by the power of the heavenly tribulation, their spirit consciousness incarnations would also be in danger of being destroyed. At this moment, the valley in the middle of the area enveloped by the heavenly tribulation had already disappeared. The power of the self-destruction of the Wind Clan ancestors' heavenly Tao incarnation was so strong that it destroyed the entire valley. A huge bottomless pit had appeared where Gu Fei had been. The pit was still absorbing the essence of the earth. After the wind tribulation, the next wave of heavenly tribulation was still brewing. It didn't start immediately. Although heavenly tribulation was terrifying, it often left a chance for the person undergoing it to survive. The next wave of heavenly tribulation did not descend immediately. This was a slim chance of survival. Gu Fei did not dare to be negligent. He immediately took out a small jade bottle, uncorked it, and poured a drop of divine liquid into his mouth. After directly ingesting the droplet of divine liquid, his tattered martial body healed at a visible rate in the next moment. A tremendous life force erupted from his body. The droplet of divine liquid allowed Gu Fei to recover to his peak condition in just a few seconds. Even the shattered 9 Heavenly Stars sword and sky blue immortal gold battle armor flew back to Gu Fei. Countless fragments blossomed with dazzling divine light. Under the guidance of Gu Fei's power, they reformed into a divine sword and a celestial robe in front of him. Gu Fei put on the sky blue immortal gold battle robe and grasped the 9 Heavenly Stars sword. His aura was much stronger than before. The medicinal liquid of the immortal ancestral dragon divine medicine is indeed monstrous. No wonder even an extreme-grade sovereign wants to obtain it. Ji Yufei was overjoyed when he sensed the power in his body rising. A single drop of liquid had such a heaven-defying effect. He had never expected it to have such a heaven-defying effect. For the sake of this extreme path heavenly tribulation, Ji Yufei had put in a lot of effort. He deliberately entered his inner world and found the immortal ancestral dragon herb in the depths of his inner world. Then, he asked for 9 drops of the immortal ancestral dragon herb's medicinal liquid, which were the 9 drops of immortal ancestral dragon herb's blood essence. The extreme Tao supremacy heavenly tribulation had 9 waves, so Ji Yufei had asked for 9 drops of essence blood from the immortal ancestral dragon medicine. Ji Yufei initially thought that he would need to use a drop of the immortal ancestral dragon's blood essence in each wave of the heavenly tribulation. However, he managed to endure the first and second waves of the heavenly tribulation until the third wave, where he had no choice but to use the immortal ancestral dragon's blood essence. In Ji Yufei's opinion, the 9 drops of blood essence of the undying ancestral dragon herb were his 9 lives. One must know that a single drop of the immortal ancestral dragon herb's blood essence could even revive a dead person. With these 9 drops of immortal ancestral dragon herb's blood essence, Ji Yufei was confident that he could survive this heavenly tribulation. However, the heavenly tribulation was full of uncertainties. Therefore, even if Ji Yufei was well prepared, he would still face the danger of dying under the heavenly tribulation. At this time, as the wind tribulation dissipated, Ji Yufei could feel some kind of change in his body. A wind rune emerged from between his brows and then disappeared, as if it had never appeared before. However, he knew that this wind rune was extremely powerful. The lightning pattern of the sky lightning, the fire pattern of the earth fire, and now the wind pattern. Out of the 9 great Tao patterns, there were still 6 Tao patterns that had yet to experience the ultimate heavenly tribulation. At this moment, Ji Yufei suddenly raised his head and looked at the tribulation clouds in the sky. He saw that the originally pitch-black tribulation clouds had changed color. High up in the sky, the tribulation clouds were vast and mighty, and the power of the 5 elements was condensing. This shocked Ji Yufei. Sky lightning, earth fire, and wind were the 5 elements. How was this possible? Moreover, wasn't the earth-fire tribulation the fire tribulation of the 5 elements heavenly tribulation? Wouldn't this heavenly tribulation repeat itself? Just as Ji Yufei was filled with questions, the 5 elements tribulation in the sky began to activate. Bolts of 5-colored tribulation lightning struck down from the 5-colored tribulation clouds. Every bolt of 5-colored lightning tore through the void and struck Ji Yufei instantly. At this moment, the disheveled old man had already kept the 3-boundary stone. Without the protection of the 3-boundary stone, Ji Yufei's hair stood on end, smoke came out of his nose, and his face was black. He was in an extremely wretched state. The power of the 5 elements tribulation lightning was much stronger than the first wave of the sky lightning. Even though Ji Yufei was wearing the sky blue immortal gold battle robe, he was still almost killed. Roar. Faced with the bolts of 5 elements tribulation lightning descending from the sky, Ji Yufei roared and waved the 9 heavenly stars sword in his hand, destroying the 5 elements tribulation lightning that was constantly striking down. Ji Yufei's heavenly tribulation was indomitable. He wasn't like most people who were only thinking about how to defend against the heavenly tribulation and only think about how to survive the duration of the heavenly tribulation. His heavenly tribulation was one where he took the initiative to attack and not defend passively. However, to Ji Yufei's shock, the 9 heavenly stars sword in his hand was smashed into pieces by a 5 elemental tribulation lightning that fell from the sky before he could block 105 elemental tribulation lightning bolts. Although the 9 heavenly stars sword was smashed into pieces, the fragment still carried an immortal divinity and floated around Ji Yufei. This. Chapter 3768. Ji Yufei had never imagined that his 4th wave of the extreme path heavenly tribulation would be the 5 elements heavenly tribulation. This 5 elements heavenly tribulation was also a rare heavenly tribulation. Even in the long cultivation history of the ancestral realm, the 5 elements heavenly tribulation had only appeared a few times. But now, Ji Fei had actually triggered the 5 elements heavenly tribulation. Compared to the sky lightning tribulation, earth fire tribulation, and wind tribulation, the 5 elements heavenly tribulation's power couldn't even be compared to the previous 3 heavenly tribulations combined. This was because the 9 heavenly stars sword in Ji Fei's hand had only blocked less than 100 of the 5 elements heavenly tribulation before it was smashed into pieces by the 5 elements heavenly tribulation. However, the fragments of the 9 heavenly stars sword didn't turn into scrap metal. They continued to float around Ji Fei. Every fragment, even the tiniest fragment, was emitting an immortal divine light. Without a sword, I'll use my fists to smash this 5 elements heavenly tribulation. Ji Fei's battle intent surged. He looked up into the sky, his long hair dancing behind his head. In the next moment, an extremely tyrannical primordial chaos power erupted from his body. The countless fragments of the 9 heaven stars sword floating around him actually rushed into his body in the next moment. This was a martial arts battle technique that Ji Fei had cultivated early on. It was a true human weapon fusion battle technique that allowed one to obtain the power of a divine weapon. The 9 heavenly stars sword was a weapon that Ji Fei had refined himself. Using his martial body to nourish the divine sword was originally an alternative method of weapon refinement for Ji Fei. Rumble, the 5-colored tribulation clouds came crashing down from the sky. Endless 5 elements heavenly tribulation descended, forming a terrifying sea of 5 elements heavenly tribulation that drowned Ji Fei below. Roar. At the same time, 5 figures followed the 5 elements heavenly tribulation down from the 5-colored tribulation clouds in the sky and directly attacked the sea of 5 elements heavenly tribulation. These 5 figures were extremely powerful. As they descended at the same time, the power of the entire 5 elements heavenly tribulation soared several times. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, 5 terrifying figures surrounded Ji Fei, who was in the middle of the 5 elements lightning sea. As Ji Fei blocked the 5 elements tribulation thunder that bombarded from all directions, he was also on guard. He was very surprised that the great path imprint of the 5 elements tribulation thunder had been activated so quickly. It must be known that the power of the great Tao brand was the most powerful force that the heavenly tribulation used to obstruct the heavenly tribulation. It would usually appear at the end, but now, these fellows who were supposed to appear at the end had actually jumped out so quickly. The 5 illusory figures were definitely extremely dangerous existences. If he was not careful, Ji Fei would be killed by these 5 fellows and perish. Naturally, Ji Fei didn't want to die. In the next moment, his body shook, and 5 illusory figures rushed out from his body and attacked the 5 figures. A great battle broke out. The power of the 5 elements heavenly Tao brand left behind by the 5 peerless experts was too strong. If it had been anyone else, they would have wet themselves in fear when faced with such a heavenly tribulation. Ji Fei immediately created 5 clones and attacked those fellows. However, a scene that left Ji Fei in disbelief happened. He saw that his 5 clones couldn't even withstand a single attack from the other party and were directly dispersed. At the same time, the 5 figures closed in on Ji Fei and attacked at the same time. 5 palms landed on Ji Fei's body at the same time. Even though Ji Fei was wearing the sky blue immortal gold armor and had merged with the 9 heaven stars sword, he still couldn't withstand the attack. Bam! In the next moment, Ji Fei's physical body collapsed into a mist of blood. There seemed to be no power in the world that could withstand the combined attack of the 5 heavenly Tao brand. Ji Fei was very strong. He had withstood the first 3 waves of the heavenly tribulation. However, the 4th wave was too strong. What an insane heavenly tribulation! At this moment, even the disheveled old man who was overseeing the endless killing formation couldn't help but be shocked. He knew that the power of the heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range would be insane. However, he didn't expect it to be so insane. At this moment, the blood mist that Ji Fei's martial body collapsed suddenly gathered together and completely recovered in the blink of an eye. Boom! He directly sent the wood element supremacy's heavenly Tao incarnation flying with a punch. At the same time, the other 4 experts attacked at almost the same time and once again blasted Ji Fei into pieces. However, Even if he was blasted into pieces, he could still reconstruct his martial body in the shortest time possible. At this moment, the ancestral dragon immortal Herb's blood essence that Ji Yufei consumed had yet to dissipate. Ji Yufei was experiencing unimaginable hardships. Roar! Ji Yufei roared as he fought against the 5-5 elemental supremacy. These 5 elemental supremacy were all existences close to the extreme Tao. Ji Yufei was continuously blasted into pieces. The 9 heaven stars sword and sky blue immortal gold battle armor were already beyond recognition. However, the fragments of these 2 quasi-supreme Tao treasures were also bathed in the 5 elemental tribulation lightning. At this time, Ji Yufei suddenly grabbed one of the wood elemental divine being's heavenly Tao incarnation's arm and pulled with all his might, ripping the wood elemental divine being's arm off. However, he was also being attacked by the heavens Tao brand of the other 5 elemental deities. This was a method that would cause both sides to suffer. However, these 5 elemental deities were just another type of existence formed from the heavens Tao brand. Chaotic reversal. Ji Yufei immediately used one of the 9 secrets of immortal Tao, the chaotic reversal secret art. In the next moment, the power of the chaotic reversal secret art erupted from his body, causing the void around him to distort. All of the 5 elemental tribulation lightning that was heading towards Ji Yufei were all shifted away by his chaotic reversal secret art. Ji Yufei channeled the chaotic reversal secret art with all his might. The 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, actually started fighting against each other. If this scene was seen by outsiders, it would definitely cause an uproar. Unfortunately, other than the disheveled old man, no one else had the chance to witness it. The 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, attacked with all their might. Under the influence of Ji Yufei's chaotic reversal secret art, the 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, started fighting. Although the wood element supremacy's arm was severed by Ji Yufei, flesh and blood quickly grew back from the severed arm. In just a few breaths' time, a completely intact right arm appeared before Ji Yufei's eyes. Even though the 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, were extremely powerful, the 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, were fighting intensely. The power of the 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, immediately weakened. Soon, the 5 elemental supremacies, heavenly Tao incarnations, suddenly stopped. In the next moment, the 5 figures collided with each other and disappeared at the same time. A figure that was much stronger than before appeared in the void. 5 elemental supremacy as one. Chapter 3769. Rumble. The entire heaven and earth shook, as though it would collapse at any moment. The 5 heavenly Tao imprints actually clashed together in an instant. Then, a scene that made Ji Yufei's heart palpitate occurred. The 5 heavenly beings disappeared. The power of the 5 elements intertwined and a silhouette that made the entire world shudder appeared before Ji Yufei. 5 elements combined? There's such a transformation. If Ji Yufei said he wasn't shocked, it would be a lie. Though the 5 heavenly beings were powerful, after combining, they would be even more terrifying and powerful. This heavenly being was emitting an endless amount of heavenly light from head to toe. His entire being emitted a terrifying chi, as if before him, everything else was like an ant. Roar! This heavenly being howled into the sky. In the next moment, a terrifying sound wave expanded and even half of the dark clouds in the sky were dispersed. The entire heaven and earth shook. The extremely stable primogenitor realm's heaven and earth void had black spatial cracks. This was absolutely shocking. To know that they were inside the ancestors' mountain range and not outside. The ancestors' mountain range was where the ancestors' vein of the earth was located. The space here was much more stable than the outside world. Even a demigod might not be able to shatter the space here. Yet now, this heavenly being merely howled and cracked the space. Watch out! Just then, the disheveled old man's voice arose. Whoosh! Just then, the heavenly being suddenly stared at Ji Yufei. Rays of light shot out of his eyes that were hundreds of meters long. Like sharp swords, they pierced through the space. What? Upon seeing this, Ji Yufei was taken aback. This celestial being seemed to be different from the rest. He had never seen such an existence before. Could it be that this person, Jiu Fei, thought of a possibility and his scalp felt numb? If this is true, then this person is truly heaven-defying. Amazing. While Jiu Fei was still in shock, the deity suddenly disappeared into the void without any warning. The deity's speed was so fast that even Jiu Fei was shocked. Bam! With a muffled sound, Jiu Fei flew backwards. Before Jiu Fei could react, a fist had already smashed into his chest. The sound of bones breaking came from Jiu Fei's body. He felt as if he had been hit by an immortal mountain, and he was sent flying thousands of meters away. He looked down and saw that there was a fist mark on his chest. The fist mark had penetrated deep into his body. This god sent Jiu Fei flying with a single punch. The combat strength he displayed was heaven-defying enough. If others saw this, it would definitely shake the entire primogenitor realm. Jiu Fei possessed the strongest martial body and had also fused the 9 heaven stars sword into his body. At this moment, he was absolutely invincible among his peers. At this moment, a figure appeared in front of Jiu Fei without any warning. The deity extended his right hand and a devouring force immediately surged out from his palm, enveloping Jiu Fei in an instant. Jiu Fei only felt his body tighten. Then, he flew towards the god uncontrollably. Die! Without any hesitation, Jiu Fei charged towards the deity. With a single punch, the entire heavens and earth trembled. Boom! With a loud bang, the two fists instantly collided. A violent and powerful force immediately erupted, and a figure was sent flying. The person who was sent flying was actually Jiu Fei. Even Jiu Fei himself could not believe that he was sent flying by a guy that was created by the heavenly Tao. How was this possible? Although it was hard to believe, the truth spoke louder than words. The 5 heavenly Tao marks of the 5 elemental gods could actually merge into one and become such a powerful existence. This was something that Jiu Fei could never have imagined. Die! Jiu Fei took a step forward and instantly disappeared into the void. In the next moment, a giant foot came down from the sky and stomped down on the god's head. A terrifying force came out of Jiu Fei's right foot. The space below his foot immediately collapsed. He was using all his strength. This was the first step of the 8 steps, 8 kills of the 8 desolate steps, also known as the first kill. However, Jiu Fei's extremely ferocious first step was actually blocked by the deity with a seemingly casual raise of his hand. Without any suspense, Jiu Fei was once again sent flying. This god actually broke his 8 steps 8 kills secret technique. This was something that no one could have imagined. This god was like a supreme being attacking. Because of this, even Jiu Fei could not remain calm. This was only the 4th wave of heaven's retribution, and such a terrifying guy had already appeared. Although this was only a silhouette formed by the heavenly Tao marks, this was the first time that Jiu Fei had encountered such a powerful existence. If it was any other peak quasi-supremes, they would have already given up all hope. However, Jiu Fei would not. He would only become stronger and stronger, becoming invincible. Roar! Jiu Fei roared and charged back. Bang! Boom! Shocking sounds of impact could be heard continuously. Jiu Fei was going all out. He directly performed the secret technique of rising to the heavens and stimulated his potential. A terrifying and violent energy exploded from his body. Jiu Fei crazily operated the secret technique of rising to the heavens and stimulated the potential in his body to the maximum. His cultivation actually rose by several times in an instant. Buzz! He used his finger as a sword and drew a line in the air. The extremely sharp sword light forced the celestial being to retreat. Jiu Fei followed up with another attack. 9 immortal sword lights rushed out from his body and rushed towards the god at an extremely fast speed. That god seemed to have an independent consciousness. He was also performing his killing technique and fighting with Jiu Fei. Wherever the 2 powerhouses went, everything was mercilessly obliterated. Brat, put in some more effort. The disheveled old man was also extremely nervous. One must know that if Jiu Fei were to die under the heaven's retribution, everything that he had done previously would be in vain. What's going on? At this moment, Ji Fei suddenly felt that something was amiss. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky were gathering and shrouding the surroundings. A strong wave of energy came down from the tribulation clouds, shocking the heavens. The fifth wave of heaven's retribution is coming. Ji Fei mumbled to himself while fighting with the god. That god was very strong. He was the strongest incarnation of the heaven's will that Ji Fei had ever encountered. The five elements combined into yin and yang, causing the qi of the five elements to spread out in all directions. Boom! The energy wave from the body of the figure continued to rise. Soon, the void around him began to vibrate. The energy that erupted from his body shook the void around him. This was definitely the moment when the figure was at his strongest. Without any hesitation, the silhouette attacked again. He struck out with his palm and the entire world was instantly blocked by a huge hand. This was definitely the heaven-encompassing palm. This was a battle technique that Ji Fei had cultivated, the heaven-encompassing palm. The moment the heaven-encompassing palm was used, it was absolutely shocking. The huge palm slapped down on the figure. Boom! With a loud bang, the heaven-encompassing palm that was even bigger than a mountain slapped the figure into the ground, leaving a huge palm print on the ground. The surroundings of the palm print were filled with smoke and dust. The ground cracked and collapsed. It was as terrifying as the end of the world. This was the power of the heaven-encompassing palm that Ji Fei had performed with all his might. With his current cultivation base, when he used the heaven-covering palm, the power that erupted from the heaven-covering palm was naturally even more powerful and terrifying. Boom! In the next moment, the huge palm print on the ground suddenly exploded. A figure rushed out from the sky full of dust. "All right, I'm done playing." Ji Fei became serious. He waved his fists and the power of the five elements surged. He directly performed the five-element fist and smashed it at the figure. Monstrous divine fire immediately engulfed the figure that rushed out from the ground. However, the mysterious figure seemed to have disappeared. Even Ji Fei used the secret technique of ascension to stimulate his own imprint to the maximum. How is this possible? Ji Fei was very surprised. He knew that the figure would not be able to return to the heavens will so easily. However, he could not sense the existence of the figure. Good Lord! Ji Fei knew that the figure was definitely using a secret technique. It was a secret technique similar to the 9 secrets of the immortal path, the anti-emptiness secret technique. Otherwise, no one would be able to easily hide from Ji Fei and not be discovered by Ji Fei. Be careful. At this moment, the disheveled old man's voice suddenly rang in Ji Fei's mind. Then, Ji Fei felt his body tremble. In the next moment, he turned into a cloud of blood mist. In the blood mist, a ball of primordial spirit light floated. This was what Ji Fei wanted to protect. Once the primordial spirit was destroyed, even if his cultivation was heaven-defying, he would become a walking corpse. In the next moment, the blood mist disappeared and an extremely powerful figure appeared in the void. Ji Fei had actually reconstructed his physical body in an instant and returned to his peak state. At this moment, a terrifying aura reappeared in the sky. The power of the ultimate god formed by the fusion of the 5 elements gods had far exceeded Ji Fei's expectations. Initially, when the disheveled old man said that the success rate of passing the heavenly tribulation here was very low, Yi Futian did not think much of it. Now, it seemed that passing the heavenly tribulation here was not a good thing. Be careful. At this moment, the disheveled old man's voice rang out. He was warning Ji Fei but did not make a move. This guy, Ji Fei, was speechless. Was the disheveled old man really going to make a move only when he was tortured to the point of death by the heavenly tribulation? Chapter 3770. Ji Fei did not expect his sovereign's heaven's test to be so insane. It was only the 4th wave of heaven's test and he was already on the verge of collapsing. Bang! Without any suspense, with a muffled sound, Ji Fei was once again punched into a mist of blood by the ultimate god. The disheveled old man could not help but be moved. However, the disheveled old man did not plan to help. After all, the heaven's test was to be faced by the ultimate god and not someone else to block it for him. 5-element fist. Ji Fei displayed his self-created battle skill. The powerful 5-elemental fist force seemed to be able to destroy everything. Every time he threw a punch, the ferocious fist force would turn into a huge dragon that pounced towards the ultimate god. The fist force turned into a dragon that shook the earth. The power of Ji Fei's 5-element fist was no longer the same as before. With a single punch, even a quasi-supreme being would be smashed into smithereens. However, such a powerful fist force was like child's play in front of the ultimate god. With a casual slap, the dragon-shaped fist force was sent flying away and dissipated in the void. The ultimate god took a step forward and casually attacked. However, he was able to break through Ji Fei's 5-element fist. This made Ji Fei extremely unhappy. Boom! The ultimate god pointed his finger and Ji Fei was sent flying into the sky. With a bang, he was smashed into pieces in the void. What, with the fighting power of an ultimate god, he was simply suppressing Ji Fei. However, Ji Fei would not give in so easily. It was just a heaven's test. He did not believe that a heaven's test would take his life. Rumble. Suddenly, a blinding lightning appeared in the void. Every lightning tore through the void and the destructive aura spread in all directions. It was terrifying. A figure that looked like an ancient god of thunder appeared in the endless lightning. The energy ripples that erupted from the figure were extremely similar to the first wave of heavenly tribulation that Ji Fei had faced. This person was none other than Ji Fei. This wasn't his primordial chaos power, but rather the power of lightning formed from primordial chaos power. Primordial chaos energy was originally heaven and earth ancestral energy. It could evolve into all sorts of powers in the world. Ji Fei had already grasped the thunder mark when he was undergoing the heavenly lightning tribulation. At this moment, the power of the Thunder Tao surged from his body, as if he had become the incarnation of the Thunder Tao sovereign. Kill! Ji Fei roared in anger. He waved his right hand and an endless amount of destructive lightning shot towards the ultimate god. It covered the sky and covered the earth. However, the ultimate true god walked towards Ji Fei step by step as if he was taking a stroll in the park. The lightning bolts that bombarded him were all blocked 3 feet away from his body. The void where the ultimate god was at had become a special space. Other than the power of the 5 elements, no other power could exist in this space. What is this, an absolute domain? Seeing this scene, Ji Fei couldn't help frowning. This fellow was incredible. It seemed that this fellow really possessed a certain degree of independent will. But how was this possible? This had broken Ji Fei's understanding of the incarnation of the heavenly way. It was the first time he had seen such an existence. It was unbelievable. One must know that the heavenly way was heartless. The heavenly mark was just a projection left behind by the experts who had successfully passed the heavenly tribulation. Such a projection should not leave behind any willpower of the experts who had passed the heavenly tribulation. However, there was no time for Ji Fei to think too much as the ultimate god had already arrived in front of him. An endless amount of lightning struck towards the ultimate god from all directions. However, no matter how strong the lightning was, it could not penetrate 3 feet of the void around the ultimate god. Without any suspense, the ultimate god broke through the layers of lightning and pointed towards Ji Fei. In the next moment, Ji Fei's martial body instantly shattered in the void. This time, he was heavily injured and even his primordial spirit became dimmer. To Ji Fei, this was definitely not a good thing. However, Ji Fei was like a cockroach that could not be killed. Very quickly, he formed his martial body real body again and a strong ripple of energy was emitted from his body. When he formed his martial body again, the aura and ripple of energy emitted from Ji Fei's body became even stronger. This time, it was a test for his 5 elements Tao. The ultimate god was the pinnacle of the 5 elements Tao. As long as he defeated the ultimate god, he would be able to obtain the 5 elements profound. However, it would not be easy to defeat the ultimate god this time around. The ultimate god was too strong and he was formed from the fusion of 5 heavenly Tao marks. Again, Ji Fei roared and an endless amount of fire elemental energy erupted from his body. In an instant, the entire heaven and earth was covered by an endless amount of divine fire. The ultimate God was also engulfed by the endless divine fire. Within the sea of fire, there were faintly discernible fire lotuses. This kind of fire elemental energy was definitely able to smelt immortal materials. It was the divine fire that countless weapon-crafting grandmasters yearned for. The more powerful the weapon-crafting grandmaster, the higher the grade of the divine fire that he needed. Ji Yufei also knew how to forge weapons. He could be considered half a weapon-crafting grandmaster. The 9 Heaven Stars sword that he forged was his masterpiece. At this moment, the 9 Heaven Stars sword merged with Ji Yufei's martial body. Ji Yufei was blasted into a mist of blood and the 9 Heaven Stars sword was smashed into pieces. The sky blue immortal golden battle armor that Ji Yufei was wearing was also smashed a few times. However, the 2 quasi-supreme fairy weapons were reformed together with his martial body. At this moment, the 9 Heaven Stars sword in Ji Yufei's body and the sky blue immortal golden battle armor that he was wearing started to form a subtle connection. There was a weak breath of life coming from within the 2 quasi-supreme Dao weapons. To Ji Yufei, this meant a lot. Although the heavens trial brought destruction and death, it also brought a ray of hope. You have no chance. At this moment, the ultimate God that was formed by the heavenly mark actually emitted a wave of spiritual will. What? When a voice rang out in Ji Yufei's mind, his expression instantly changed. What's going on? Could it be that I've guessed correctly? The ultimate God actually had its own consciousness and could communicate with Ji Yufei. He had never encountered such a thing before. Rumble, the ultimate God's body suddenly emitted an unprecedentedly strong wave of the 5 elemental energy. The entire heaven and earth shook from the wave of energy that was emitted from his body. Are you the only one who knows how to show off? Ji Yufei transmitted a message to the ultimate God in disdain. At this moment, the ultimate God opposite of Ji Yufei attacked again. The next moment, the godly fire that filled every inch of the void was extinguished by the ultimate God's water elemental energy. Upon seeing this, Ji Yufei could not help but be dumbfounded. The ultimate God's water elemental energy was extremely strong and water was the nemesis of fire. As such, it was impossible for Ji Yufei to defeat the ultimate God with his fire elemental energy. Swoosh! The endless godly fire dissipated in the void. In the next moment, there was a whistling sound of wind coming from Ji Yufei's body. At this moment, the power of the great way of wind was emitted from Ji Yufei's body and the surrounding water elemental energy was immediately blown away. Streams of invisible wind blades flew towards the ultimate God. The ultimate God did not use any powerful secret skills. He was surrounded by the 5 elemental energy and easily blocked the countless wind blades. However, when the ultimate God struck out with his fist, there was no dazzling divine light and no strong ripples of energy. However, with such a palm, Ji Yufei's extremely strong martial body, 9 Heaven Stars sword and the sky blue immortal golden battle robe were all shattered in the void. Roar! Ji Yufei roared towards the sky. Endless wind elemental energy exploded from his body and a terrifying aura engulfed the entire heaven and earth. However, it seemed to be useless. The wind elemental energy could not harm the ultimate God at all. The ultimate God was so strong that it was hard to imagine. After exchanging 2 blows, Ji Yufei was killed by the ultimate God. To be more accurate, he was turned into a blood mist by the ultimate God. There was a faint divine light in the blood mist. How is this possible? Ji Yufei could not believe it. This was only the 4th wave of the sovereign heaven's tribulation. This was only the 4th wave of the sovereign heaven's tribulation. Was he going to be stuck here? Was he going to be stuck here? No one could answer these questions for Ji Yufei. This time, Ji Yufei took a lot more time to recover than before. Ji Yufei had no choice but to continue. However, he soon realized a problem. It was not a good thing for him to fight with the ultimate God like this. The void he was in was sealed by a formation. He could not absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. As such, he could not absorb the essence of heaven and earth to recover and strengthen his cultivation and fighting power. However, at this moment, Ji Yufei was doomed. If he could not absorb the essence of heaven and earth, no matter how strong Ji Yufei was, he would be exhausted to death in the end. This was a crisis. At this moment, as Ji Fei's martial body was reborn, a strong wave of energy exploded from his body. This time, the 5 elemental energy exploded from his body. Ji Fei finally used the power of the 5 elemental Tao. 5-colored divine light exploded from his body and lit up the entire dark heaven and earth. At this moment, 2 5 elemental Tao masters were confronting each other in the sky. A terrifying aura spread in all directions. Even the spectators outside the heaven's tribulation could feel the waves of the 5 elemental energy. Chapter 3771. In the primogenitor mountain range of the primogenitor realm, a small half of the mountain range was shrouded in tribulation clouds. On this day, almost all the supremes in the primogenitor realm were alarmed. More than a dozen supremes appeared outside the primogenitor mountain range with their divine senses. This was the first time someone was undergoing a supremacy heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range. Before this, no one had ever dared to undergo a supremacy heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range. That was because no one was willing to fail at this stage. In everyone's opinion, only a madman would undergo a supremacy heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range. By now, everyone had already guessed that the person undergoing a supremacy heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range was definitely not the Yingtian Patriarch. After all, the Yingtian Patriarch didn't have the guts to undergo a supremacy heavenly tribulation. However, why would the Yingtian Patriarch spread the news of him undergoing a supremacy heavenly tribulation? Many people smelled a conspiracy, but no one knew why the Yingtian Patriarch would do this. Meanwhile, the supremacy heavenly tribulation continued and more cultivators gathered outside the primogenitor mountain range. Many experts in faraway places received the news a little late, but there were still countless experts coming to the primogenitor mountain range. In the entire primogenitor realm, the most eye-catching and sensational event was none other than the supremacy heavenly tribulation. Even some super antiques that had disappeared for countless years had once again appeared in front of the world, which shocked everyone. At this moment, someone was already saying that the person inside had already endured the first 3 waves of the supremacy heavenly tribulation and was currently contending with the 4th wave. When this news spread, everyone was extremely shocked. The fella inside is simply heaven-defying. Exactly. If it were us, I'm afraid we would have been defeated by the first wave of the supremacy heavenly tribulation. You're amazing, my brother. Although the spectators outside the primogenitor mountain range couldn't see the situation inside and couldn't sense anything, the supreme existences could still deduce which wave of the supremacy heavenly tribulation Ji Fei was undergoing from the vast changes in the heaven and earth powers inside the primogenitor mountain range. In the void enveloped by the supremacy heavenly tribulation, the heaven and earth laws were extremely chaotic. Any divine senses that entered the void would be directly obliterated. Even extreme Tao sovereigns did not dare to challenge the heavenly tribulation because this was the primogenitor mountain range and not some ordinary place. No one knew what would happen. Rumble, at this time, in the center of the heavenly tribulation, 2 powerful figures were confronting each other. 2 supreme powers of the 5 elements were constantly colliding in the air. The space between the 2 great experts was actually constantly collapsing under the collision of the 2 5 elements powers. Then, under the effect of the world energy, it was constantly repaired, over and over again. Who the hell are you? Ji Fei stared at the ultimate true God formed by the 5 elemental imprints and said. The heavenly Tao was heartless and the heavenly Tao imprint did not have its own consciousness. However, the ultimate true God who was fighting with Ji Fei seemed to have its own consciousness. How was this possible? You don't need to know who I am. All you need to know is that today is the day you die. The ultimate God Heavens will incarnation suddenly said. Brat, looks like someone wants to make things difficult for you. Suddenly, the disheveled old man's voice rang out in Ji Fei's mind. You know what's going on? Ji Fei quickly transmitted a message to the disheveled old man. However, on the surface, his face was still calm. Only an honorable can affect the heavenly Tao. The disheveled old man said. What? Ji Fei couldn't help but be shocked when he heard this. Could it be that my identity has already been seen through by those enemies? That seemed to be an impossible matter. He really did have many enemies in the primogenitor realm. Moreover, these enemies were all extreme-grade paragons, especially the Wood tribe, which was even more impressive. When Jiyu Fei was in the ancestral god world, he had once killed an expert from the Wood race. The Wood race was in a terrible state and had no choice but to retreat in the end. Go and die. At this time, the ultimate true god suddenly roared and attracted the 9 heavens' 5 elemental lightning. Rays of 5-colored lightning descended from the sky and struck down on Jiyu Fei's head. This was truly the 5 lightning strike. I don't care who you are, I'll kill you. Jiyu Fei let out a furious roar. He stretched out his right hand and sucked the 5 elements' divine lightning that came crashing down from the sky into his hand. Buzz! The void vibrated and a huge 5-colored lightning ball appeared on Jiyu Fei's right hand. The huge lightning ball was filled with the power of the 5 elements. Go! Jiyu Fei waved his right hand and the lightning ball flew towards the ultimate true god. In the next moment, the ultimate true god disappeared from the void and the terrifying 5-colored lightning ball exploded. Destructive energy spread out in all directions and a huge black hole with a diameter of a few thousand feet appeared in the sky. 5 elemental wheel. Jiyu Fei immediately used his killer move. The power of the 5 elements surged between his hands and a divine wheel of extermination appeared in front of him. In the next moment, the divine wheel soared into the sky and gave off boundless 5 elemental light that lit up everything. Let's see where you can hide now. Jiyu Fei only saw a dark shadow passing through the void. He stretched out his hand and struck the dark shadow with his palm. In the next moment, a figure was knocked out of the void by Jiyu Fei's palm. At this moment, the 5 elemental wheel that was floating in the sky came down from the heavens and blasted the ultimate true god down into the ground. This was the first time Jiyu Fei had the upper hand in the battle and he was extremely excited. However, in the next moment, tragedy struck him. A ray of divine light shot up from the ground and hit him. Bang! Jiyu Fei's entire body collapsed in the void. At this moment, a resplendent primordial spirit light burst out from the blood mist. It was as though a godly sun had appeared in the dark heaven and earth, lighting up the entire heaven and earth. At this moment, the godly light dissipated and a figure appeared in the void. This person drew his bow and shot an arrow towards Jiyu Fei's primordial spirit light. Just as the ultimate true god's arrow was about to pierce Jiyu Fei's primordial spirit light, the arrow suddenly disappeared in the void as though it had turned into nothingness. At this moment, a powerful and overbearing figure appeared in the void. This person was Jiyu Fei. He had been reborn. After Jiyu Fei's rebirth, his fighting power had become even stronger. Stronger against stronger opponents. Chapter 3772. It was no secret that an extreme Tao honorable could affect the heavenly way. Someone was plotting against Jiyu Fei and wanted to borrow the power of heaven's retribution to kill Jiyu Fei. This caused Jiyu Fei to be shocked and angry. Despicable person, you want to kill me? You are not qualified. Jiyu Fei, who had reconstructed his martial body, said disdainfully towards the ultimate god that was formed from the heavenly way imprint. Whether I am qualified or not, you will find out soon enough. Ultimate god grinned. In the next moment, he turned into a ray of 5 elemental extinction god light. His figure flashed and appeared in the distant sky. At this moment, Jiyu Fei lowered his head and saw a bloody hole through his chest, causing him to be in disbelief. The speed of the ultimate god was too fast. It was so fast that Jiyu Fei did not even have time to react and his chest was pierced by the divine light. At this moment, the ghastly hole in Jiyu Fei's chest was quickly disappearing. His wound was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. At Jiyu Fei's level of cultivation, normal attacks would not be able to harm his life. To kill him, one would need to use a special technique. Boom! At this moment, the ultimate god rushed over again. This time, Jiyu Fei suddenly shattered the void around him. When the ultimate god's divine light collided with Jiyu Fei, it rushed into the primal chaos. What? The ultimate god was shocked. At this moment, he was extremely terrified and wanted to rush out from the primal chaos. However, Ji Yufei grabbed onto the ultimate god. In the next moment, a terrifying violent energy exploded from Ji Yufei's body. The ultimate god, was scared out of his wits. Before he could react, boom! With a loud explosion, Ji Yufei's entire body exploded. Self-destruct. He actually wanted to use the most extreme method to kill an ultimate god. Ji Yufei cultivated the 9 secrets of the immortal Tao. One of the 9 secrets, the Ascension secret art, cultivated the esoteric of life. To be honest, anyone who mastered the Ascension secret art wouldn't be able to die even if they wanted to. There was no suspense. Ji Yufei had cultivated the primordial chaos martial body. The power that erupted from his self-detonation would probably move even a true extreme Tao supremacy. Moreover, this was the land of primal chaos, so Ji Yufei could attack without any qualms. Without any suspense, the ultimate true god formed by the heaven path imprint collapsed in the void. A resplendent imprint shot up into the sky, broke through the void and appeared in the ancestors' world. The imprint suddenly split into 5 imprints representing the 5 elements before soaring into the sky and disappearing into the depths of the sky. No one expected Ji Yufei to self-destruct to kill an ultimate god. Very quickly, he reformed his martial body and a heaven-devouring force surged out from his body, crazily devouring the essence left behind by the ultimate god. After devouring the essence left behind by the ultimate god, he quickly recovered his fighting power and rushed out of the land of primal chaos. At this moment, boundless life force descended from the sky and enveloped Ji Yufei. The next moment, a 5-elemental Tao pattern appeared on Ji Yufei's Yuan Shen. The 4th wave of heaven's retribution finally dissipated. However, the 5th wave of heaven's retribution was still gathering. At this moment, a strange scene appeared in the sky. Ji Yufei raised his head and stared at the ever-changing retribution clouds in the sky. His expression was extremely solemn. Ji Yufei was inexplicably shocked. He saw that the tribulation clouds in the sky had actually gradually turned into an incomparably huge yin-yang Tao diagram that appeared high in the sky. The retribution clouds in the sky also turned into 2 colors, one black and one white. Boundless yin and yang qi were gathering crazily. The retribution clouds in the sky pressured everyone to the point of suffocation. Ji Yufei, who was in the center of the heaven's retribution clouds, was the first to bear the brunt of it. However, his expression did not change in the face of such a terrifying heaven's retribution clouds. Is this the 5th wave? At this moment, in the sky outside the Primogenitor mountain range, a blurry figure muttered to himself. The 5 elemental energy has disappeared and the yin and yang qi are gathering. This technique, an honorable martial artist said such words. The person in the Primogenitor mountain range actually survived the 4th wave of heaven's retribution clouds. To the cultivators outside the Primogenitor mountain range, it was too surreal. How is this possible? Countless of spectators exclaimed in shock. Yin-yang life and death calamity. Brat, your luck is really good. At this moment, Ji Yufei, who was standing under the retribution clouds, suddenly trembled. The disheveled old man's voice rang in his mind again. Yin-yang life and death calamity. The moment Ji Yufei heard the name of the heaven's retribution clouds, he knew that it was definitely an incomparably terrifying heaven's retribution clouds. You've always been undergoing the extremely rare heaven's retribution cloud. The disheveled old man was speechless as well. Ji Yufei's luck was simply too good. If it was anyone else, they would have been blasted to smithereens by the heaven's retribution clouds. In reality, Ji Yufei was exasperated. Was this the consequence of undergoing the heaven's retribution clouds in the Primogenitor mountain range? At this moment, there was no time for Ji Yufei to ponder any further. That was because a figure walked out of the gigantic yin-yang diagram in the sky. Ji Yufei was a little dumbfounded. The moment the 5 elements life and death calamity was activated, the heavenly Tao imprint appeared in the form of a shadow. How is this possible? Even the disheveled old man was dumbfounded. It was the first time the heavenly Tao imprint had descended at the start of the heaven's retribution clouds. As the god of the mountain and river cauldron, the disheveled old man had existed for countless years and had witnessed the birth of many supremacies. It could be said that no one in the entire primogenitor realm could compare to the disheveled old man in terms of knowledge. Kill. The young expert that walked out of the tribulation clouds roared and threw a punch at Gu Fei. Rumble, a thunderous sound rang out. The seemingly casual punch of the young man actually exploded with immense power. Without any suspense, Gu Fei was sent flying once again as a series of hideous wounds appeared on his body. If not for the fact that his chaotic primordial martial body was strong enough, he would have died a long time ago. At this moment, the wounds on Gu Fei's body were disappearing rapidly. Roar. Gu Fei roared into the sky. He had never felt as aggrieved as he did today. The heavenly Tao imprints that were formed from the heavenly Tao imprints were each stronger than the previous. It took him a lot of effort to get rid of these guys. But now, the heavenly Tao imprints that were formed from the heavenly Tao imprints were truly strong to a heaven-defying extent. He had no advantage at all. He could only be abused, and very miserably at that. Come, I'm going to kill you with my fists. Chapter 3773. Gu Fei ended the fourth wave of the ultimate heavenly tribulation by exploding himself. However, when the fifth wave arrived, he couldn't help but curse. The fifth wave of the heavenly tribulation turned out to be an extremely rare and powerful heavenly tribulation, the yin-yang life-death tribulation. The yin-yang force was a test of life and death. If one wasn't careful, even someone as strong as Gu Fei would have to kneel, let alone the other participants. Once the yin-yang life-death tribulation appeared, almost no one could resist it. At this moment, the tribulation clouds above Gu Fei's head turned into a gigantic Tai Chi yin-yang diagram. An unimaginably powerful figure walked out from the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram. Die. Without any hesitation, Gu Fei charged forward. However, in the next moment, tragedy befell him. The young man merely waved his right hand, and Gu Fei was sent flying. Countless cracks appeared on his body. Gu Fei was shocked. This guy is too heaven-defying. I'm invincible among my peers, yet this guy almost shattered my martial body with a wave of his hand. This was definitely not a good thing for Gu Fei. The yin-yang force descended from the sky. In the void shrouded by the tribulation clouds, a strange scene appeared. In the void, the life force and death force intertwined. At times, the aura of life was vast and mighty. At other times, everything was growing. At other times, the aura of death exploded and everything withered. Although the figure of the young man who walked out from the yin-yang diagram in the sky was faint, the aura he emitted was unusually shocking. This guy was like a terrifying existence that walked between the yin-yang world and the yang world. It was as if the god of life and the god of death were in one body. Gu Fei also cultivated the yin-yang force and comprehended the yin-yang Tao. However, his yin-yang Tao was not so extreme. This guy clearly transformed the yin-yang force into the life force and death force. This was the yin-yang Tao. There was nothing wrong with the general direction. However, this extreme yin-yang Tao was also the life force and death force. The young man was like a supreme existence that controlled life and death. I don't care who you are. I'll blow you up with one punch. Gu Fei stared at the young man and said coldly. He. A wave of divine will suddenly spread out from the terrifying figure. What? Gu Fei was taken aback. How could this fellow have his own will? Could it be that there was really someone powerful enough to affect the will of heavenly tribulation? Are you done yet? At that moment, the disheveled old man was extremely displeased as well. How dare someone strike at the person he was protecting? Wasn't that a slap to his face? In the next moment, a shocking murderous aura shot up into the sky from the area enveloped by the heavenly tribulation. A mass of divine light emerged and directly enveloped the area. This ball of divine light was able to isolate all divine consciousness, but it could not isolate the power of the heavenly tribulation. This was the disheveled old man's doing. He wanted to isolate the power of some people's consciousness in an attempt to sever their influence on the heavenly Tao. The moment the ball of divine light appeared, in a valley several 100,000 miles away from the primogenitor mountain range, a black-clothed man sitting on a platform suddenly opened his eyes. Hehe, you want to use this kind of method to stop me? Dream on. The black-clothed man raised his head and looked up into the sky. In the next moment, an imprint rushed out from his glabella and shot into the sky, disappearing into the depths of the firmaments. What? The disheveled old man could not help but be shocked when he sensed it. He realized that the formation he had activated was useless. Someone had still forcefully attached their will onto the heavenly Tao. Using one's own will to affect the heavenly Tao was truly shocking. At that moment, even the disheveled old man could not think of any way to stop this. The disheveled old man could not sit still any longer. Initially, the success rate of Gu Fei's tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range was already very low. Now that something like this had happened, Gu Fei's success rate would be even lower. If Gu Fei were to fail the tribulation, he would be in for it as well. Roar. At that moment, Gu Fei roared continuously as powerful chaotic primordial energy burst forth from his body. He was like an ancestral dragon that had rushed out of the primordial chaos, colliding with the young man continuously. Humph! The young man was extremely domineering. With a casual wave of his hand, he forced Gu Fei back continuously. Gu Fei's body was filled with cracks as though he was a porcelain that could shatter at any moment. He's too strong. Old man, why aren't you coming out to help? Gu Fei could not take it any longer. In front of this guy, he was as weak as an ant. He could sense that this guy did not take him seriously at all and was merely toying with him. That pissed Gu Fei off. You'll have to rely on yourself to tide through this. The disheveled old man's voice rang in Gu Fei's mind. Relying on myself again? Help me kill that guy then. Gu Fei hollered. How could someone affect the heavenly Tao and kill him with the power of the heavenly tribulation? How could he be killed so easily? All right. It's been a long time since I've fought with anyone. I'll fight him then. The disheveled old man sat cross-legged in the void of his formation. He had set up countless killing formations around the valley that Gu Fei was in so that he could protect Gu Fei. Now that someone was trying to attack Gu Fei, he naturally could not stand idly by. Using a secret skill to affect the heavenly Tao? Hee. Within the void of the formation, the disheveled old man suddenly opened his eyes and revealed a cunning smile. He had lived for countless years and was a god of the mountain and river cauldron. He had followed many extreme Tao Supremes in the past and had actually mastered a secret skill that could affect the heavenly Tao with one's own will. However, it was not an easy task to use such a secret skill. One had to pay a price in order to affect the heavenly Tao. The disheveled old man did not want to pay any price. However, he would not be able to kill that guy this way. Damned brat, I'm going to pay a huge price for you. As the disheveled old man said that, an imprint appeared on his glabella and shone with an endless divine light. The next moment, the imprint surged into the skies and penetrated through countless formations. Swoosh! The disheveled old man's spirit imprint disappeared into the dark skies. The next moment, in the valley hundreds of thousands of miles away, the middle-aged man who was sitting cross-legged on the platform suddenly opened his eyes and let out a look of disbelief. A drop of blood seeped out from his glabella and he almost collapsed onto the ground. Instantly, he looked exhausted and extremely pale. Swoosh! Suddenly, the middle-aged man raised his head and saw something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. A divine light descended from the skies and rushed into his body. In the next moment, it was as if someone had cast a spell on this middle-aged expert, and he instantly became motionless. Bam! The middle-aged man exploded and turned into a mist of blood. Both his body and spirit were destroyed. Even at the moment of his death, that guy would not know how he was killed because everything happened too quickly. You don't know what's good for you. The disheveled old man's voice rang out. At this moment, he did not have any reservations at all. The moment the disheveled old man destroyed the imprint on the heavenly Tao, Gu Fei immediately sensed that the guy he was fighting with had turned cold and emotionless. Kill! Gu Fei roared and turned into a chaotic primordial ancestral dragon. A gigantic dragon claw grabbed at the young man. The dragon claw was even larger than a mountain and exuded a terrifying force of chaos and primordial chaos. Bam! The young man also made his move. Two powerful forces instantly collided with each other, causing a terrifying energy storm to erupt. Ripples of space that could be seen with the naked eye spread out in all directions with Jiyu Fei and the heavenly Tao's incarnation as the starting point. The two silhouettes separated in an instant before colliding together once more. Violent energy kept erupting, shaking the entire sky and void. At this moment, Jiyu Fei was extremely shocked. Even after using the secret skill of ascension, he could only fight to a draw with this guy. The two unimaginably powerful experts were fighting with their lives on the line. Suddenly, a terrifying force of death surged from the young man's body and enveloped Jiyu Fei. The next moment, Jiyu Fei felt the essence in his body flowing out rapidly. It was as though he had aged suddenly. It was extremely strange. Jiyu Fei didn't think too much about it. He immediately used the secret word of Wu, and all the essence qi that gathered towards him was directly dissolved. At this moment, Jiyu Fei was absolutely invulnerable. However, the young man seemed to have transformed into a death god of extreme Tao. His body was surrounded by death essence, which could be seen with the naked eye. Clang! The young man's body emitted the sound of metal colliding. The next moment, divine chains shot into the sky and entangled Jiyu Fei. Jiyu Fei was taken aback. He could suddenly sense the terrifying death aura coming from the iron chains that were entangling him. Those were the death chains. If he was entangled by them, he would only end up being killed. This death god was really terrifying. Although it was difficult to deal with when he was affected by someone else's will, it was much easier than now. Sky-shaking fist. Jiyu Fei did not use any powerful magic or great technique. He simply threw a punch at the entangling death chains. The next moment, the death chains shattered in the void. However, the next moment, Jiyu Fei's vision blurred. He felt a sharp pain between his eyebrows. He saw that the incarnation of the heavenly Tao had appeared in front of him and pierced his eyebrows with a finger. Chapter 3774. Jiyu Fei's fifth wave of the ultimate heavenly tribulation was simply too heaven-defying. It was the legendary life and death yin-yang tribulation. Throughout the ages, even in the cultivation history of the ancestral realm, the life and death yin-yang tribulation was a heavenly tribulation that had only appeared once in hundreds of thousands of years. Of course, anyone who triggered the life and death yin-yang tribulation during their extreme Tao heavenly tribulation would be extraordinarily lucky. It could be said that Jiyu Fei's luck was simply too good to be able to trigger such a heavenly tribulation. This was definitely a heavenly tribulation that could make one despair. At this moment, the young man formed by the heavenly Tao imprint of the life and death yin-yang tribulation displayed his invincible battle prowess. He pierced through Jiyu Fei's forehead with a single finger. If it had been anyone else, they would have long since died after being struck by that finger. However, Jiyu Fei was no ordinary person. While others had their essence spirit in their forehead, his entire body was imprinted with his life imprint. Even a single strand of his hair was imprinted with his life imprint. Therefore, even if someone were to kill Jiyu Fei, as long as Jiyu Fei was left with a single strand of hair or a single drop of blood, he would be able to be reborn right away. However, the power of death that was injected into Jiyu Fei's body was rapidly devouring his life force. His entire body was thinning at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, all that was left was skin and bones. The power of death that the heavenly Tao imprinted into Jiyu Fei's body was simply too terrifying. In just a few breaths' time, Jiyu Fei's life force was about to be depleted. "Are you still not going to die this time?" The young man formed by the heavenly Tao imprint placed his hands behind his back and looked at Jiyu Fei calmly. "It's that B** starred again." This time, the disheveled old man in the void was truly enraged. He had just gotten rid of the fella who wanted to use the power of the heavenly tribulation to kill Jiyu Fei. Now, someone was going to use the same method to deal with Jiyu Fei. The disheveled old man knew very well that the fella who struck in the dark was extremely skilled. He wouldn't have struck personally and would have sent someone else as cannon fodder. One had to know that the price of dealing with Jiyu Fei was simply too great. If he were to successfully overcome the tribulation and become an extreme-grade utmost being, the consequences would be dire. Boom! A huge hand suddenly grabbed down from the sky. Without any warning, the huge hand directly grabbed towards the young man. A powerful force surged out from the huge hand and instantly enveloped the space around the young man. However, when the large hand slammed down, the young man formed by the heavenly Tao imprint did not dodge at all. He allowed the large hand that descended from the sky to strike his body. When the giant hand dissipated into the void, the young man was still standing there, motionless. It was as if he had been standing there since the beginning of time. What? The disheveled old man who was seated cross-legged in the void of the array formation could not help but be shocked when he saw that. At this moment, the terrifying figure suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. There was a cold look in his eyes, and his face was as calm as an ancient well, without a trace of emotion. Preposterous! How dare you act tough in front of me? The disheveled old man was enraged. Do you think I'm joking when I've laid down multiple killing formations? Even if it was the heavenly Tao imprint, he was confident that he could destroy it completely. He was about to strike again. However, at this moment, Ji Yufei's voice rang out in the disheveled old man's mind. The initially enraged disheveled old man suppressed the rage in his chest and sat quietly in the array formation space without saying anything more. At this moment, Ji Yufei's body was undergoing a shocking change. The initially skinny Ji Yufei expanded like a balloon. At this moment, an unprecedentedly powerful life force burst forth from his body. In the next moment, he returned to his peak state in an instant. An extremely domineering aura filled the air, causing the space around him to tremble. This was a technique that was born from death. It's just a struggle before death. The young man formed by the heavenly Tao imprint said indifferently. Just who are you? Ji Yufei glared at the figure opposite him with a grim expression. Instinctively, he could sense that this existence posed a huge threat to him. The person behind him was definitely an extreme Tao supremacy. Could it be the same person? At this moment, the disheveled old man who was seated in the void of the array formation suddenly opened his eyes. Even though he had killed a fella who used his will to affect the heavenly tribulation, that fella was not an extreme Tao supremacy. Interesting. The disheveled old man suddenly laughed. What sort of a character was an extreme Tao supremacy? There was no need for them to personally make a move to form such an irreconcilable karma with Ji Yufei. Those fellas did not want to see Ji Yufei become an extreme Tao supremacy, nor did they want to personally make a move. Therefore, those cannon fodder were the unlucky ones. Actually, the disheveled old man had guessed this long ago. The fella he killed earlier on was simply too weak. Profound meaning of life and death. I'm someone who walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. You want to kill me with a mere deathly aura? You're thinking too highly of yourself. Ji Yufei stared at the young man opposite him and sneered. The next moment, his aura changed drastically. At this moment, he seemed to have turned into a terrifying grim reaper with countless ferocious spirits vaguely appearing and howling around him. I've underestimated you. A wave of spiritual will came from the young man. Kill. Ji Yufei's murderous aura was terrifying. He took a step forward and disappeared into the void instantly. He displayed the 8 desolation steps and displayed the extreme speed of 8 steps. Boom. The next moment, there was a loud bang as the two fists collided. 2 bursts of deathly energy exploded and the two figures separated. However, they clashed again in an instant. Bam! In less than 10 moves, Ji Yufei was sent flying by that fella's palm. Half of his body was smashed into pieces and turned into a mist of blood. Swoosh! Just as Ji Yufei was sent flying, 2 beams of yin-yang divine light shot out from that person's eyes and chased after Ji Yufei, slashing into Ji Yufei's body. Ji Yufei's body shook as though his vitality had been severed and he had turned into a corpse. However, at the next moment, a shocking wave of energy erupted from Ji Yufei's body. It was the aura of life and endless vitality erupted from his body. In just an instant, the small half of Ji Yufei's body that was smashed into pieces recovered rapidly. Very soon, his martial body was completely restored. Extreme death could give birth to extreme life. This was Ji Yufei's understanding of the great Tao of life and death. Life and death existed mutually. Where there was life, there would be death. This was the law of the great Tao of heaven and earth. Again. Chapter 3775. Those supreme martial artists who used their will to influence the heavenly tribulation did not know that they were actually helping Jiyu Fei by doing so. Because the heavenly Tao was merciless, the fifth wave of the supreme heavenly tribulation was extremely terrifying. If it were not for those guys who wanted to deal with Jiyu Fei would not have had it so easy. The merciless heavenly Tao was much more terrifying than those supreme martial artists who had emotions. Die. Without any hesitation, Jiyu Fei charged towards the figure formed by the imprint of the heavenly way. Extremely sharp sword light shot out from his body and pierced through the figure. The figure merely waved his sleeve, and all of the sword lights that pierced towards him immediately shattered in the void. In the next moment, the blurry figure instantly appeared in front of Jiyu Fei. What? Jiyu Fei was taken aback. Without hesitation, he immediately retreated. However, at that moment, a palm had already pressed against his chest. Bang! Jiyu Fei's entire body exploded. Every drop of Jiyu Fei's blood was emitting dazzling primordial divine light. Every drop of blood seemed to be nurturing a powerful life. This was Jiyu Fei's current realm of the great Tao of life. Every drop of blood, every strand of hair, and every piece of bone, was a life. They were all his life. It was too difficult to kill such a person. As long as a drop of blood or a strand of hair was not destroyed, he could be reborn and reappear in the world. This was an ability that only supreme martial artists could have. Supreme martial artists were publicly recognized as invincible in the myriad worlds of execution. It was almost impossible to kill them. This was also the reason why there were very few battles between supreme martial artists. Because if one couldn't be killed and escaped, it would definitely be a disaster for the other supreme martial artist's family and force. Once the supreme martial artist took revenge, the consequences would be extremely severe. Rumble. Suddenly, a thunderous sound rang in the void. Jiyu Fei's martial body was blasted into a cloud of blood mist. The blood mist quickly gathered and a figure appeared in the void. Even so, you still have to die. The blurry figure took a step forward and pushed his hands forward. The power of yin and yang immediately surged out from his hands and turned into a Tai Chi yin-yang diagram that rushed towards Jiyu Fei. Wherever the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram passed, even the extremely stable space of the primogenitor's realm was destroyed. Wherever the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram passed, it left behind a pitch-black spatial crack. I'll borrow your strength to train my Tao heart, Jiyu Fei shouted. Then, he took a step forward and directly rushed onto the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram. He then sat cross-legged on the diagram. A terrifying destructive power surged out from the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram, wrapping around Jiyu Fei's entire body, wanting to obliterate Jiyu Fei. This guy, when the disheveled old man saw that, he could not help but shake his head. Jiyu Fei's actions were always unexpected and even the disheveled old man could not guess what his next move would be. You're courting death. The blurry figure directly sat cross-legged in the void and activated a mysterious art. The power that erupted from the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram soared. He wanted to obliterate Jiyu Fei and eliminate this great enemy. But was that even possible? At that moment, Jiyu Fei actually sat cross-legged on the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram and used the destructive power that erupted from the diagram to refine his martial body. The destructive power that erupted from the Tai Chi yin-yang diagram flowed through Jiyu Fei's body and actually produced a clanging sound, as if it was rubbing against metal. At that moment, the people outside the heavenly tribulation were also extremely nervous. However, no one could see what was happening inside the primogenitor's mountain. If they knew, it would probably cause a commotion. What's going on? The fifth wave of the heavenly tribulation actually lasted for so long. Someone said impatiently. It can't even withstand the fifth wave. A quasi-supreme existence said indifferently. He stared at the heavenly tribulation and a vertical eye on his forehead opened and closed, emitting a terrifying divine light. This guy is definitely not Yingtian Ancestor, someone voiced out everyone's doubts. Yingtian Ancestor definitely couldn't undergo the heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain because he didn't have that ability. It's not Yingtian Ancestor? Then who is it? Someone exclaimed. At that moment, Yingtian ancestor had already left the primogenitor mountain and returned to the Yingtian ancestral land. However, the entire ancestral land was under Mu Jinghong's control. However, Mu Jinghong wasn't guarding the ancestral land at the moment. Mu Jinghong, you bastard. Yingtian ancestor didn't directly attack. If he attacked now, he might be able to take back the ancestral land, but Mu Jinghong definitely wouldn't let it go. The experts of the Wood clan would definitely come. He knew that before Jiyu Fei finished his heavenly tribulation, he absolutely couldn't appear in front of anyone. Although Yingtian ancestor was furious, he still managed to suppress his anger in the end. This kind of ability wasn't something an ordinary person could master. Yingtian ancestor didn't let his anger get to his head. Yingtian ancestor looked into the depths of the ancestral land and then turned around, disappearing into the mountains. At this time, the primogenitor mountain range was still covered in tribulation clouds. Layers upon layers of tribulation clouds turned into a massive primal chaos yin-yang diagram. This massive Tao diagram resonated with a small Tao diagram below. The power that erupted from the small Tao diagram gradually became more and more terrifying, as if it could obliterate all. Jiyu Fei directly sat down on this small Tao diagram. In just a few breaths of time, Jiyu Fei's mortal body collapsed onto the small Tao diagram. The destructive power gathered on the small primal chaos yin-yang diagram was absolutely at a heaven-defying level. A mass of blood-red light floated above the Tao diagram. This mass of blood-red light erupted with an astonishing life force. This blood-red light didn't disperse, and wanting to obliterate it was extremely difficult. How is this possible? The heavenly Tao incarnation was shocked to the extreme. Of course, a true heavenly Tao incarnation didn't have any emotions. But now, this heavenly Tao incarnation was affected by another will. Like this, even if this fellow was even more powerful, Jiyu Fei still wouldn't fear it. An emotionless heavenly Tao was the most terrifying existence, because such a heavenly Tao didn't have any flaws. But, a heavenly Tao that had emotions would have flaws. If there were flaws, then they could be dealt with. Soon, the mass of blood-red light above the small Tao diagram vanished. Jiyu Fei's figure appeared on the small Tao diagram, exuding a pitilessly powerful aura. Jiyu Fei's martial body constantly disintegrated and reformed. His martial body gradually transformed, becoming increasingly formidable. His flesh, blood, muscles, and bones all transforming towards a perfect boundary. Chapter 3776. Attracting the power of heavenly tribulation to temper one's martial body. In the entire universe, perhaps only Jiyu Fei dared to do such a crazy thing. Moreover, it was during the sovereign heavenly tribulation. The ultimate leap, invincible throughout the universe. At this step, everyone had to be careful. They absolutely didn't dare to be careless or negligent. Even peerless sovereigns like the martial ancestor and the ancient Buddhist lord did not dare to resist the extreme Tao heavenly tribulation with their flesh when they were transcending it. At this time, a destructive aura filled the heavens and the earth. The tribulation clouds in the sky revolved crazily, and the power of the yin-yang diagram was terrifying to the extreme. And below the yin-yang diagram formed by the tribulation clouds, there was also a small yin-yang diagram. At this time, Jiyu Fei sat cross-legged on the small yin-yang diagram. The power of the fifth wave of heavenly tribulation completely gathered on the minor primal chaos yin-yang Tao diagram. At this time, even if a piece of immortal divine metal were to be thrown into the minor primal chaos yin-yang Tao diagram, it would still be instantly obliterated by the power of the Tao diagram. The figure formed by the heavenly Tao sat cross-legged in the void, drawing the power of heavenly tribulation with all its might. Jiyu Fei's body had already collapsed countless times, but he still had no intention of leaving the small yin-yang diagram. He cultivated the Heaven Ascension secret technique, so he didn't have to worry about dying. Even if the fifth wave of heavenly tribulation destroyed his body and soul, he could still ascend to heaven and be reborn. How is this possible? They saw with their own eyes that Jiyu Fei's body and primordial spirit had collapsed more than 10 times, but Jiyu Fei could still defy the heavens and be reborn, condensing his primordial spirit and martial body. And every time he was reborn, the power that erupted from his body would become stronger. This caused the mastermind who controlled the heavenly Tao to be stunned. Even the fifth wave of heavenly tribulation couldn't do anything to this guy. Ji Fei was verifying his own yin-yang Tao. Although heavenly tribulation brought destruction, it also brought vitality. This was heavenly tribulation, there would always be a glimmer of hope. A black and white yin-yang Tao pattern began to condense in Ji Fei's primordial spirit. It gradually evolved and transformed towards a perfect state. The aura of the great Tao of yin and yang on Ji Fei's body grew stronger and stronger. In the end, the speed at which his martial body crumbled slowed down. It took a long time for his martial body to crumble. His martial body was transforming into a perfect martial body. Ji Fei's 9 heavens stars sword rushed out of his body and bathed in the power of yin and yang together with the sky blue immortal golden battle armor. The heavenly star sword of the 9 heavens and the heavenly blue immortal gold battle robe were also constantly crumbling and reforming. Be it the heavenly star sword of the 9 heavens or the heavenly blue immortal gold battle robe, the 2 Tao artifacts were gradually condensing an aura of the great Tao. The 2 Tao artifacts also began the process of a perfect metamorphosis. Gradually, the interior of the Tao artifacts gave birth to the God of Life. At this time, the incarnation of the heavenly Tao could no longer sit still. This guy was too abnormal, he was actually using the heavenly tribulation to temper his body. Preposterous, the incarnation of the heavenly Tao was shocked and enraged. He clenched his teeth and directly displayed his killing move. 2 great dragons directly rushed down from the giant Tai Chi yin-yang Tao diagram in the sky. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The moment the yin-yang dragons appeared, the entire void that was covered by the yin-yang life and death tribulation began to shake as if it would collapse at any moment. The 2 great dragons directly fell from the sky, pouncing towards Ji Fei, who was sitting cross-legged on the small Tao diagram. The might of this pounce shook the heavens and earth, terrifying to the extreme. Go! Ji Fei, who was sitting cross-legged on the little yin-yang Tao diagram, let out a low roar. The 9 heaven stars sword suspended in front of him immediately soared into the sky and met the 2 dragons that were descending from the sky. However, the moment the 9 heaven stars sword collided with the 2 great dragons, it disintegrated in the void, turning into motes of light. The divine light of the great Tao didn't dissipate into the void, but instead flickered in the void. Ji Fei abruptly raised his head and 2 rays of immortal divine light shot out from his eyes. The 2 rays of divine light turned into a shocking sword aura and flew towards the yin-yang dragon that was pouncing towards him. The power of this move was astonishing. Wherever the shocking sword chi passed, 2 pitch-black spatial cracks appeared in the void. However, in front of the 2 great dragons, Ji Fei's ultimate killing move simply couldn't withstand a single blow. The 2 great dragons directly stretched out their dragon claws. The 2 shocking sword chi directly collapsed in the void, instantly dissipating into nothingness. Die! Ji Fei suddenly stood up from the small yin-yang Tao diagram. The sky blue immortal golden battle armor instantly appeared on his body, and then he punched upwards. Above his fist, a huge dragon shadow rushed out. Boom! The dragon-shaped fist force that Ji Fei struck out instantly collided with the 2 great dragons that rushed down, and the sound of the explosion shook the void between heaven and earth. In the next moment, the dragon shadow fist force that Ji Fei struck out directly collapsed, and the dragon shadow disappeared. The 2 great dragons that descended from the sky only paused for a moment, and then immediately swooped down towards Ji Fei. In just an instant, Ji Fei's martial body was torn to pieces by the 2 great dragons. The sky blue immortal golden battle armor that Ji Fei wore was also torn to pieces, turning into countless glowing fragments that floated in the void, gathering together without dispersing. At this level, whether it was the 9 heaven stars sword or the sky blue immortal golden battle armor, they were not doctrine weapons that could be easily destroyed by the heavenly tribulation. These 2 doctrine weapons were already closely related to Ji Fei. As long as Ji Fei did not die, these 2 doctrine weapons would not be destroyed. During the heavenly tribulation, it was an extremely rare thing to bring along 2 quasi-supreme doctrine weapons at the same time. With Ji Fei's knowledge, he only knew that the Millennium Buddha Lord had done this before. There was no doubt that the Millennium Buddha Lord was powerful. Since ancient times, only the Millennium Buddha Lord had refined many Supreme Doctrine weapons. As for the other Supreme Doctrine weapons, they usually only refined one Supreme Doctrine weapon that belonged to them. As for the legendary martial ancestor, he did not have any Supreme Doctrine weapons, because his entire body was an Supreme Doctrine weapon. There was no need for him to refine another Supreme Doctrine weapon. The legendary martial ancestor cultivated the strongest physique of the human race. Since ancient times, in terms of physical strength, no one had ever surpassed the martial ancestor. Haha, you're still not dead this time? The incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path laughed maniacally. At this moment, the two dragons condensed from the power of the yin-yang tribulation opened their mouths and spat out a dragon's breath of death, burning Jiu Fei's flesh and bones in the void into ashes. Even Jiu Fei's primordial spirit was burned into a puff of green smoke and dissipated. You're not dead yet. I'll carry your shoes for you. The blurry figure stood up in the void. However, in the next moment, he was dumbfounded. He saw a figure appear in the void without any warning. What's wrong? Aren't you going to carry my shoes for me? At this moment, a wave of divine will spread from the blurry figure. The figure was shocked and furious. It was unbelievable that this guy was still alive. How is this possible? Does this guy really have an immortal body? Die. There was no other way. The incarnation directly rushed to the small Taiji yin-yang diagram and used the yin-yang killing technique to attack Jiu Fei. Jiu Fei grabbed the air with his right hand and a divine sword immediately appeared in his hand. He directly slashed at the attacking incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path. This was a sword of the gods. It contained Jiu Fei's most powerful essence, qi, and spirit. When the sword slashed, it seemed to be able to destroy a great world. The incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path was directly cut in half by Jiu Fei's sword. How is this possible? The incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path said these words before it disappeared. In my eyes, nothing is impossible. Jiu Fei said coldly as he watched the incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path gradually disappear. The incarnation of the mark of the heavenly path was filled with endless unwillingness. Finally, it completely dissipated in the void and disappeared without a trace. The mark of the heavenly path collapsed. In the end, it could not return to the heavenly path. At this moment, as the mark of the heavenly path was destroyed, the incomparably huge Taiji yin-yang diagram that covered the entire sky also dissipated. Endless tribulation clouds still enveloped the world. The Taiji yin-yang diagram under Jiu Fei's feet also disappeared into the void. The sky-blue immortal gold battle robe and the 9 heaven stars sword had also been reassembled. The sky-blue immortal gold battle robe was worn by Jiu Fei, and the 9 heaven stars sword was held in his hand. The 5th wave of the extreme path heavenly tribulation was forcibly passed by Jiu Fei. Next, the 6th wave of the extreme path heavenly tribulation was about to descend. Jiu Fei looked up at the violently tumbling tribulation clouds in the sky. He instinctively felt danger. What kind of heavenly tribulation was this 6th wave of the extreme path heavenly tribulation? Soon, Jiu Fei discovered that the tribulation clouds in the sky began to change. The chaotic qi was vast and mighty, and chaotic figures appeared in the tribulation clouds. It seemed that they could directly rush out of the chaos at any time. Chaotic tribulation? Jiu Fei saw that the dark clouds were pressing down. In the pitch-black tribulation clouds, there were dazzling lightning flashes from time to time. For a moment, the entire world was instantly illuminated. Smelly brat, this old man really has to give it to you. At this moment, the disheveled old man who was sitting cross-legged in the void of the array suddenly stood up. He was very shocked. This brat was really too heaven-defying. The heavenly tribulation that he triggered was enough to make ordinary quasi-supremes despair. Jiu Fei stared at the tumbling tribulation clouds in the sky. His entire body was filled with battle intent, and the 9 heaven stars sword in his hand was constantly vibrating. However, in the next moment, Jiu Fei was immediately terrified. He saw a chaotic figure walking out from the chaotic tribulation clouds. It was like a peerless expert with flesh and blood. Bang! That primal chaos god directly stomped down on Jiu Fei's head. Violent energy surged down from his foot, shaking the void of heaven and earth. Without any suspense, Ji Yufei was directly stomped down from the sky by that chaotic god. Be careful. The disheveled old man could no longer sit still. He could not help but roar at a woman who was crossing the road. Chapter 3777. Ji Yufei's sovereign heavenly tribulations were all extremely rare and terrifying. From the start, it was already insane. At this moment, he welcomed the sixth wave of heavenly tribulations, the chaotic tribulation. A primal chaos god walked out from the primal chaos tribulation cloud. Boom! The chaotic god was extremely powerful. With one step, the entire world shook as if it could collapse and explode at any time. It was extremely terrifying. Without any suspense, Ji Yufei was directly trampled down from the sky by the chaotic god and fell into the bottomless black hole on the ground. Roar! An earth-shattering roar came from the black hole on the ground. Under the impact of the sound waves, the entire black hole shook violently. The surroundings of the black hole crumbled continuously and large amounts of soil fell down. In an instant, the entire black hole doubled in size. Kill! Following the roar, a huge amount of chaotic energy surged out from the black hole and formed a huge chaotic energy pillar that connected the heavens and the earth. Only the disheveled old man was lucky enough to see this shocking scene. Those outside could only see chaos within the heavenly tribulations with chaotic lightning flashes occasionally. Other than that, even the incarnations of the extreme Tao's supremes could not see what was happening within. The void of the extreme Tao's heavenly tribulations was like another world. Even if a true extreme Tao's supremes were here, they would not easily barge in. One had to know that once one barged into the extreme Tao's heavenly tribulations, the heavenly tribulations would not target Ji Yufei but the extreme Tao's supremes. The primal chaos god opened his mouth and inhaled, sucking the huge pillar of primal energy into his body. The pillar of primal energy disappeared in an instant. Ji Yufei's figure appeared in the void at the same time. Shua! He immediately turned into a ray of primal chaos sword light and pierced through the primal chaos god. The extremely sharp sword light rippled outwards and the surrounding temperature immediately dropped. The chaotic sword light tore through the void and arrived in front of the chaotic god. However, in the next moment, the chaotic god casually waved his hand and slapped the sword light away. The sword beam collided against the formation set up by the disheveled old man and bounced back. The sword beam disappeared and Ji Yufei's figure appeared in the void. He was in a sorry state, with blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. His sky-blue immortal gold battle robe was full of cracks, as though it would shatter with a light touch. In order to improve the power of his sword Tao, Ji Yufei had fused with the 9 Heaven Stars sword, but he was still easily repelled by this fellow. This made him very unhappy. Seeing the chaotic god walking towards him, Ji Yufei's pupils constricted. This guy was too strong. He felt helpless. This was merely an incarnation of the heavenly Tao formed by the imprint of the heavenly Tao. If this chaotic god were to descend personally, wouldn't Ji Yufei have no chance of winning? Old man, hurry up and help. Ji Yufei stared at the approaching figure with a solemn expression. He could not see any flaws on this person. One must know that a person without any flaws might not be the scariest person. However, a person with peerless power and no flaws would be invincible. Settle it yourself. If you can't settle it, it won't be too late for me to act. The disheveled old man said. What? The veins on Ji Yufei's forehead twitched. No matter who it was, they would not be able to remain calm when facing such an undefeatable opponent. However, in the next moment, a shocking battle intent erupted from his body. The stronger I meet, the stronger I become. I've never been afraid of anyone. Come. Ji Yufei stared at the chaotic god who was already in front of him. His cowardly look was swept away, and he instantly became tall and mighty. The chaotic god attacked without any hesitation. He stretched out his hand and grabbed towards Ji Yufei. In the next moment, the chaotic god's hand rapidly enlarged in Ji Yufei's eyes. In an instant, it filled his eyes, and the chaotic energy enveloped the entire area. The chaotic god's strength had reached an unimaginable level. Even a simple attack from him could contain great power. Ji Fei snorted coldly. He immediately punched out. In the next moment, boundless chaotic energy gathered from all parts of his body towards his fist. Wang! The void rumbled and a ball of dazzling primal chaos divine light erupted from Ji Fei's fist. His fist was like a primal chaos star as it smashed towards the incoming primal chaos hand. Just as Ji Fei's fist was about to collide with the incoming chaotic hand, the chaotic divine light on his fist increased by 10 times. At this moment, it was as though a chaotic divine sun had appeared under the tribulation clouds. It illuminated the entire world and dispersed a small portion of the tribulation clouds in the sky. However, the chaotic god's expression did not change. He did not retract his chaotic hand and continued to grab towards Ji Fei. Seeing this, Ji Fei's heart skipped a beat. In the next moment, his fist collided with the chaotic god's chaotic hand, resulting in a muffled sound. In the next moment, Ji Fei's fist, which was emitting boundless chaotic divine light, suddenly darkened. Following which, he felt a powerful force coming from his fist. Ji Fei could clearly hear the sound of his bones breaking. Following which, his entire body flew backwards. The sky-blue immortal gold battle robe on his body instantly shattered into countless chaotic divine light and turned into a rain of light that scattered in all directions. After using the secret technique of ascension, Ji Fei coughed out blood and directly collided with the layer of divine light formed by the killing array laid by the disheveled old man. The layer of divine light trembled continuously from the impact and ripples spread across the layer of divine light. Is actually this powerful? The disheveled old man was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. This brat, Ji Fei, was not an ordinary quasi-supreme expert. He was a quasi-supreme expert at the peak of the martial way. He possessed a powerful martial body that even divine beasts would be fearful of. Ji Fei was nearly invincible among those in the same cultivation realm. He could even put up a fight against extreme venerables like Kang Qiu. If he used his extreme Dao weapon, even Kang Qiu and the others would have to kneel in front of Ji Fei. But now, he could not even withstand a single blow from this chaotic god. The disparity between them was too great. The disheveled old man could not believe it. Ji Fei was actually beaten up by this chaotic god. This brat, Ji Fei, is in trouble. Chapter 3778. Ji Fei had already withstood 5 waves of the extreme Dao heavenly tribulation. The first 5 waves were daunting, but Ji Fei was suppressed by the 6th wave. That's right, when the 6th wave began, Ji Fei was suppressed and beaten up. The more he fought back, the more he was tortured. The 6th wave of the heavenly tribulation was simply too sick. The primal god formed from the imprint of the heavenly Dao was so powerful that Ji Fei almost lost his temper. Too powerful, Ji Fei was sent flying by the chaotic divine being once again. His body was filled with cracks, as though he could shatter at any time. His martial body was heavily injured. It was useless even if he fused with the 9 heavenly stars sword. Ji Fei's martial body and the 9 heavenly stars sword were also heavily injured. As for the sky-blue immortal golden battle robe, it had already shattered in the void, turning into countless divine lights that floated in the void. The immortal divinity did not disappear. As long as Ji Fei did not die, neither the sky-blue immortal golden battle robe nor the 9 heavenly stars sword would be destroyed by the power of the heavenly tribulation. Boom! Ji Fei risked his life. The chaotic energy became berserk. The chaotic energy of the great Dao erupted from his body like 100,000 volcanoes erupting at the same time. The space around him was distorted by the extremely powerful ripples of power that erupted from his body. Countless hair-thin cracks appeared. At this moment, the eyes of the chaotic divine being shot out 2 rays of primal divine light towards Ji Fei. At this realm, even a gaze could kill. The combat power displayed by the chaotic divine being was too monstrous. Even Ji Fei could not withstand it. Ji Fei roared. A ball of primal divine light immediately surged from his body in an attempt to block the incoming primal divine light. However, in the next moment, Ji Fei was dumbfounded. The 2 beams of chaotic divine light directly broke through his protective divine light and penetrated his martial body at the same time. The power of destruction contained in the two beams of primal divine light invaded Ji Yufei's body. In the blink of an eye, Ji Yufei's martial body was reduced to a bag of bones. His life force was almost extinguished by the destructive force that invaded his body. Preposterous! Ji Yufei did not hesitate and immediately unleashed the secret skill of winged transformation. The power of winged transformation surged in his body, and in the next moment, the vitality in his body was completely restored. However, at this moment, the chaotic god's fist had already landed on Ji Yufei's body. In the next moment, before Ji Yufei could even react, his martial physique was instantly shattered in the void, turning into a bloody mist. Within the blood mist, countless divine lights flickered. Those were the fragments of the 9 heavens stars' sword. Swoosh! At this moment, a godly light shot out from the primal chaos god's body and destroyed the blood mist. He wanted to kill Ji Yufei. However, it was definitely not an easy task to kill Ji Yufei, who cultivated the secret skill of winged transformation, one of the 9 secrets of immortal path. In the next moment, a figure appeared in the void. This figure extended his right hand, and the countless divine lights floating in the void immediately gathered in his right hand, turning into a black sword. Is this fella really invincible? With the 9 heavens stars sword in his hand, Ji Yufei stared at the fella in front of him with eyes as cold as the stars. Just as Ji Yufei was in shock, the chaotic god suddenly disappeared into the void. Even with Ji Yufei's cultivation, he could not see where the fella went. What? Ji Yufei's shock was no small matter. He had cultivated the martial path heavenly eye, yet this chaotic god was able to escape from his martial path heavenly eye. Such a technique was enough to shock Ji Yufei. In the next moment, Ji Yufei felt his head being pressed down by a huge hand. Hong! An unimaginably powerful chaotic energy surged out from the huge hand and directly confined Ji Yufei. This made Ji Yufei indescribably shocked. At this time, he couldn't even move a finger. T. Ji Yufei was shocked. An extremely dangerous aura enveloped him. His instincts told him that this chaotic god had the ability to threaten his life. The chaotic god was mysterious and unfathomable. No one knew who left this projection on the heavenly path. However, the combat power displayed by this chaotic god was enough to shock the world. This was a projection he left on the heavenly path when he was undergoing his tribulation. Hence, the cultivation realm displayed by this chaotic god was the same as Ji Yufei. However, this chaotic god's combat power was much stronger than Ji Yufei's. In the same realm, there were not many existences stronger than Ji Yufei even in the entire primogenitor world. However, this chaotic god was already stronger than Ji Yufei at the same realm many years ago. The chaotic god wanted to refine Ji Yufei alive. Very soon, Ji Yufei's body turned into ashes, leaving behind a ball of chaotic divine light. Within the ball of chaotic divine light, there was a small figure sitting cross-legged. That figure was a miniature version of Ji Yufei. At this moment, the ball of chaotic divine light emitted the Tao of primal Tao. This Tao of primal Tao resonated with the Tao of heavenly tribulation. Ji Yufei had cultivated the great Tao of primal together with the great Tao of heaven and earth. It was perfect. What Ji Yufei's great Tao of primal lacked, he could use the great Tao of heaven and earth to make up for it. This was the reason why cultivators had to undergo the heavenly tribulation after reaching a certain realm. The heavenly tribulation was triggered by the cultivator's great Tao resonating with the great Tao of heaven and earth. The heavenly tribulation would descend to temper the cultivator. If the cultivator could survive the heavenly tribulation, his cultivation would naturally soar. If he could not, his body and soul would be destroyed. The heavenly Tao was the fairest. In order to obtain great power, one must first pass the test of the heavenly Tao. At this moment, Ji Yufei's Tao resonated with the heavenly Tao. The power of the heavenly tribulation became stronger. This was a good thing for Ji Yufei because the stronger the heavenly tribulation, the more power he would obtain. Seeing this scene, the disheveled old man could no longer sit still. If he allowed Ji Yufei to be refined by that fella, Ji Yufei might really die. However, if he were to act now, He would be disturbing Jiu Fei's cultivation because Jiu Fei was using the heavenly Tao to verify the great Tao of primal that he cultivated. Rumble, sounds of wind and thunder could be heard. The ball of chaotic divine light in the chaotic god's hand was shrinking rapidly. At this moment, Jiu Fei was only using the great Tao of primal chaos. Jiu Fei's Yuan spirit, who was sitting cross-legged in the chaotic divine light, felt a great threat. Chapter 3779. To Jiu Fei, undergoing his tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range of the primogenitor world meant that he had to face more unpredictable dangers because this place was not ordinary. Since ancient times, in the entire cultivation history of the primogenitor world, there had never been anyone who dared to undergo the sovereign heavenly tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range. That's right, there had never been anyone. In the eyes of countless living beings in the primogenitor world, the primogenitor mountain range was a treasure land, a dangerous land, and a holy land. In the primogenitor world, all cultivators would be warned by their teachers not to undergo the tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range because it was no different from courting death. But now, someone actually went to the primogenitor mountain range to undergo the tribulation, and it was the extreme path sovereign tribulation. When the news spread, the entire primogenitor world was in an uproar. However, the primogenitor world was too big, much bigger than any other great world. It was so big that even the spiritual will of an extreme path sovereign could not cover the entire primogenitor world. This was the primogenitor world. It was almost limitless. Even an extreme path sovereign could not find the end of this most ancient great world. One had to know that this was the origin of the myriad worlds. It hid the most ancient and mysterious secrets of the myriad worlds. When the news spread, the cultivators around the primogenitor mountain range immediately put down everything and gathered towards the place where Jiu Fei was undergoing the tribulation. Even many extreme path sovereigns were alarmed. They appeared in the eyes of the world once again. This fella is a madman. At this moment, outside the extreme path sovereign heavenly tribulation, a few sovereigns who were familiar with each other were conversing through their spiritual wills. If this fella did not undergo the tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range, he might have made the final leap and cultivated a perfect great Tao. An extreme path sovereign said. It's a pity that this is the primogenitor mountain range. No one has ever succeeded before. I believe this fella will not be an exception. Let's just wait for him to fall. An extreme grade supreme being surrounded by chaotic lightning said. Yes. Not bad. The other sovereigns could not help but nod. Since this fella's fate was already determined, they could save a lot of effort. At this moment, in the middle of the tribulation cloud, Jiu Fei was in a desperate situation. He would never have thought that the chaotic gods who walked out of the primal chaos calamity would be so powerful. Not only did the chaotic god destroy his primordial chaos martial body, he even imprisoned his Yuan Shen. He was actually trying to destroy his Yuan Shen. Of course, Jiu Fei had cultivated one of the 9 secrets of the immortal Tao, the Ascension secret art. Even if his primordial spirit was destroyed by the primal god's great divine ability, he could still reconstruct it and be reborn. This was the power of the Ascension secret art, one of the 9 secrets of immortal Tao. It was impossible for Jiu Fei to sit still and wait for death. He sat cross-legged in the primal chaos divine light like a supreme being of the primal chaos great path, completely releasing the power of the primal chaos great path. This was primal chaos against primal chaos. It was a battle between the great Tao of primal chaos that Jiu Fei cultivated and the great Tao of primal chaos of the heavenly Tao. As long as Jiu Fei could survive, his great Tao of primal chaos would transform into a perfect great Tao of primal chaos without any flaws. However, based on the current situation, it would be difficult for Jiu Fei to survive. The chaotic god immediately used a great divine ability to seal Jiu Fei's Yuan Shen. Then, he circulated his primal chaos energy in an attempt to destroy it. Jiu Fei's Yuan Shen sat cross-legged in the primal chaos divine light. 9 primal Tao runes appeared around him, releasing an extremely powerful primal chaos energy. The 9 primal chaos Tao runes opened up a void, blocking the chaotic god's primal chaos energy. However, 9 primal chaos divine runes appeared on the chaotic god's palm. His primal chaos Tao runes were very different from Ji Fei's. They were both great Tao of primal chaos, but different people would cultivate different great Tao of primal chaos. Actually, the grand Tao that every single person comprehended was different from the Tao of others. Every single person had their own Tao. Others couldn't learn it, nor could they comprehend it, because it was the only one. Although Ji Fei walked the martial Tao, the Tao he cultivated was definitely different from the martial ancestor's Tao. The martial ancestor was the martial ancestor, and he was himself. The martial ancestor pointed out the direction of cultivation for Ji Fei, but the Tao that Ji Fei walked on belonged to him. As the two great Tao of primal chaos fought against each other, the primal chaos divine light around Ji Fei's Yuanshan was still shrinking. The powerful pressure made Ji Fei's Yuanshan uncomfortable. Ji Fei knew that the moment his Yuanshan could no longer hold on, the old man would take action. At this moment, the heavenly tribulation's energy was gathering towards the chaotic god. The chaotic god had activated the entire primal tribulation's energy. No matter how strong Ji Fei's Yuanshan was, it could not fight against the primal chaos energy condensed by the extreme Tao Supreme heavenly tribulation. Soon, the primal chaos divine light around Ji Fei's Yuanshan shook violently. Fine cracks appeared on it as if it could shatter at any time. "Old man, why aren't you taking action?" Ji Fei's Yuanshan was no longer calm. However, the old man did not take action. At this moment, the god of the mountain and river cauldron was watching this scene from the void of the array. It was not the time yet. This guy, Ji Fei's Yuanshan, was about to go crazy. Was the old man really waiting for his Yuanshan to perish before taking action? Fight. Ji Fei had no choice but to use the 9 secrets of immortal Tao to protect his life. Especially the secret word none, it could directly turn the vast and powerful primal chaos energy into nothingness. This was Ji Fei's foundation. The 9 secrets of immortal Tao was his life-saving talisman. Roar. The god of chaos roared, causing the entire world to tremble. He grabbed onto Ji Fei's primal chaos divine light and used the tribulation force to obliterate Ji Fei. In the next moment, the primal chaos divine light around Ji Fei's Yuanshan crumbled. The tribulation force went straight for Ji Fei's Yuanshan. Damn it! Ji Fei's Yuanshan was both shocked and furious. The 9 great primal chaos divine light that rushed out from his Yuanshan blocked the tribulation force. However, Ji Fei knew that it could not block it for long. At this moment, Ji Fei's Yuanshan was wearing an immortal robe. It was the sky blue immortal gold battle armor. The sky blue immortal gold battle armor could change its size at will. Ji Fei's Yuanshan was also holding onto the 9 heaven stars sword. This was an existence born from the immortal robe and divine sword. It was almost like a god. However, these 2 items were not fully formed yet. They could not help Ji Fei much. What made Ji Fei the most frustrated was that the disheveled old man had taken away all his supreme Tao treasures. Otherwise, he would not be in such a sorry state with a few supreme Tao treasures protecting him. Of course, the disheveled old man had good intentions. He could not rely too much on external forces during the tribulation. If he could rely on himself, he would be able to obtain the greatest power possible. Ji Fei only managed to hold on for less than an hour before his Yuan spirit was crushed by the chaotic god. Both his body and soul were destroyed. Rumble, the supreme sovereign heavenly tribulation, was still in operation. The tribulation clouds were still shrouding the area. It did not disperse because of Ji Fei's death. The reason was simple. As long as Ji Fei was not dead, the tribulation would not disperse. If Ji Fei really died under the heavenly tribulation, the terrifying tribulation clouds would have dispersed long ago. As expected, Ji Fei's figure appeared in the void. It was faint and illusory, but the powerful aura it emitted was terrifying. Seeing this, the god of chaos immediately attacked Ji Fei. Bang! With a muffled sound, the figure that Ji Fei had just appeared was destroyed by the god of chaos. Violent energy swept out in all directions. Countless spatial cracks immediately appeared in the surrounding void. The void rippled like water, and ripples that could be seen with the naked eye spread outwards. Damn it! Ji Yufei's figure appeared again. However, the moment his figure appeared, the god of chaos immediately attacked. Without any words, the god of chaos continued to attack. Ji Yufei was once again blasted into pieces. Ji Yufei was shocked and angry, but he could not do anything. Very quickly, he was blasted into pieces by the god of chaos more than 10 times. Although he had cultivated the 9 secrets of the immortal Tao and the ascension secret technique, which allowed him to revive even if his body and soul were destroyed, he was still unhappy that he was blasted into pieces more than 10 times. It was too sullen. This made Ji Yufei go crazy. Ever since he started cultivating, he had never been suppressed by someone to the point where he did not even have a chance to retaliate. Living for such a long time, one could encounter all sorts of things. That primal chaos god did not have any intention of stopping. He wanted to destroy Ji Yufei's fleshly body. What's going on? Even the disheveled old man was speechless when he saw this. When Ji Yufei was blasted into pieces for the 999th time by the god of chaos, an immortal Tao light pierced through the void towards the god of chaos. The god of chaos did not care about the immortal Tao light. He extended his right hand and sent a palm towards the figure that just appeared from the void. However, just as the palm of the god of chaos touched the clothes on Ji Yufei's chest, the god of chaos was suddenly sent flying. It turned out that the immortal Tao light that descended from the sky had directly sent the god of chaos flying. However, the god of Tao light did not cause much damage to the god of chaos. At this moment, Ji Yufei took advantage of this rare opportunity to reconstruct his body. He appeared in the void and an extremely powerful martial aura spread out from his body. Roar! The primal chaos god roared. Terrifying ripples of energy erupted from his body, causing the myriad of worlds to pale in comparison. Countless cultivators were terrified. Kill! Ji Yufei did not say anything. He immediately attacked the god of chaos. In the next moment, an extremely sharp sword light slashed the god of chaos. At this moment, Ji Yufei could finally fight against the god of chaos. Chapter 3780. The primal chaos calamity was truly powerful and horrifying. If it was any other cultivator, he would have been killed countless times. Only a monstrous existence like Ji Yufei could withstand the primal chaos calamity until now. Furthermore, the more he was tortured by the heavenly calamity, the stronger Ji Yufei would be after he recovered. Ji Yufei had many trump cards, and the one he was using now was only one of them. He would definitely not court death. If he was not confident, why would he go to the primogenitor mountain range to undergo the calamity? At this moment, Ji Yufei could not help but be shocked. That was because the chaotic god did not seem to be injured at all after being struck by his sword. Even an incarnation formed by a heavenly Tao imprint would be destroyed after being struck by Ji Yufei's sword. It would turn into a heavenly Tao imprint and return to the heavenly Tao. However, the chaotic god was too strong. Ji Yufei's primal chaos sword could not affect him at all. At this moment, the chaotic god took a step forward and charged towards Ji Yufei. Ji Yufei could only cross his arms in front of his body to protect himself. Peng! The chaotic god directly collided with Ji Yufei's body. Ji Yufei felt as if he had been hit by a primordial divine mountain. His bones felt as if they were falling apart in an instant. In the next moment, Ji Yufei felt an intense pain all over his body. His entire body was in pain, and the pain was so deep that he could not help but let out a scream. Following that, Ji Yufei was sent flying backwards. He directly collided with the layer of light formed by the killing array laid by the disheveled old man. Ji Yufei actually directly smashed through the layer of light curtain and smashed into the killing array. Boom! With a loud sound, the killing array collapsed. Countless array runes were destroyed in the void. A killing array was destroyed just like that. This was the power of Ji Yufei's collision. The power that erupted from the collapse of the killing formation was terrifying to the extreme. The void that was enveloped by the killing formation directly collapsed, and the destructive aura spread out in all directions. Countless formation runes appeared in the void around this killing formation. The runes overlapped one another as countless killing formations appeared in the void. Countless killing formations appeared at the same time, and the murderous aura they emitted caused all the worlds in the universe to tremble. Even an extreme supremacy would be dumbfounded by this scene. Preposterous. When the disheveled old man who was sitting cross-legged in the void of the formation saw that, he could not help but be enraged. How could his formation be destroyed so easily? I am much stronger than some *T formation grandmaster. To most people, a formation grandmaster was a high and mighty existence. However, in the eyes of the disheveled old man, a formation grandmaster was nothing. In the next moment, the disheveled old man conjured seals with both hands. Countless formation patterns rushed out from his hands and were imprinted in the void. In an instant, the killing formation that was destroyed by Gu Fei reappeared in the void. To be able to form a formation with a flick of a finger. Even a formation grandmaster would be left in the dust by such means. Even Mai Tian did not possess such an ability. Hei Tian was still in the human world's ancestral Myrtle Star, working together with Ji Changkong to fight against the current clan lord of the Ji clan, Emperor Ji. The internal strife of the number one clan in the ancestral Myrtle Star had completely erupted. As the saying goes, when immortals fight, mortals suffer. No one knew how many living beings died in this internal strife. At this moment, Gu Fei had already rushed back to fight against the chaotic divine being. This time, he only managed to block 3 attacks from the chaotic divine being before his martial body was destroyed by the chaotic divine being's fist. He turned into a bloody mist, and even his Yuanshan was shattered. The sky-blue immortal golden battle robe on his body was naturally shattered, and the 9 heaven stars sword was also shattered by the chaotic divine being's fist. 3 attacks, haha, you've improved. The disheveled old man laughed loudly in the void of the formation. At this moment, in just a few breaths' time, Gu Fei, who had turned into a bloody mist, once again condensed his martial body. An even stronger aura erupted from his body. Kill. Without hesitation, Gu Fei charged forward. However, even though Gu Fei's courage was commendable, the chaotic divine being was too strong. Without any suspense, he only managed to block 5 attacks. It was 2 more attacks than before. Gu Fei did not have to worry about his energy being depleted because he had 3 inner worlds that could provide him with an endless supply of heaven and earth essence qi to help him recover his yuan qi. At this moment, Gu Fei gradually grasped the great Tao of primal chaos. He was trying to prove his great Tao of primal chaos in this battle. It had to be said that this method was very direct and effective. It should be an alternative shortcut. Hence, under the heavenly tribulation, such a shocking scene appeared. Gu Fei and the chaotic divine being fought endlessly. Every time his body and soul were destroyed, he would be able to block more attacks from the chaotic divine being after reforming his martial body. In the end, Gu Fei could actually fight 300 rounds with the chaotic divine being without being destroyed by the chaotic divine being. Gu Fei's entire body was emitting primal divine light. Primal chaos Tao patterns appeared on his body. The powerful primal chaos energy released by the powerful Tao patterns was terrifying. It was as if he had turned into a second chaotic divine being. Every move he made was filled with power. Every inch of his body was emitting primal chaos light. Good fellow, at this moment, the disheveled old man, who was hiding in the void of the array formation, could not help but be moved. This Gu Fei was incredible. Gu Fei's cultivation and combat power had improved too quickly under the tempering of the heavenly tribulation. Gu Fei was simply a natural-born expert. He took 1 step at a time. From a weak and vulnerable person, he quickly grew into an unparalleled expert. The heavenly tribulation was just a stepping stone for him. He was absorbing the energy brought by the heavenly tribulation and condensing primal chaos Tao patterns. His great Tao of primal chaos had already transformed to near perfection. Of course, Gu Fei was still lacking a little in order to make the final leap. He did not know that the extreme supremes outside the primogenitor mountain range did not think highly of Gu Fei. It was already heaven-defying for Gu Fei to be able to endure until now. It was something to be proud of. Even those extreme supremes did not expect that Gu Fei could endure the 6th wave of the extreme Tao heavenly tribulation. Because it was too difficult. In the primogenitor mountain range, No one could withstand the extreme Tao heavenly tribulation. However, Jiu Fei might be the first. Those extreme supremes outside the primogenitor mountain range could sense the danger. This made them indescribably shocked. A tiny ant in their eyes could actually threaten them. Chapter 3781. Extreme Supremacy, the Ultimate Leap. It was like an ant transforming into a dragon, and at this moment, a tiny ant like Jiu Fei was transforming into a dragon. As long as he could survive the extreme supremacy heavenly tribulation, he would be an invincible dragon in the three realms. Comprehending the primordial supremacy realm, he would be able to move freely in the myriad worlds. Extreme supremacy was amazing, but how many living beings could become supremacies in the past? In the human realm, heaven realm, ancestral god world, primal demon world, and even the primogenitor world, the number of extreme supremacies that were born could be counted. And in the myriad worlds, only a perfect world could give birth to an extreme supremacy. The primogenitor world was naturally more suitable for an extreme supremacy because it was the origin of the myriad worlds. The void of heaven and earth was incomparably stable. Even if an extreme supremacy were to fight, there was no need to worry about the destruction of the void. At this moment, under the heavens' retribution, two figures that were powerful enough to defy the heavens moved quickly in the void. Wherever they passed, the void collapsed and a destructive aura spread. Even the cultivators outside the primogenitor mountain range could feel it. Sounds of wind and thunder could be heard coming from Jiu Fei's body. It was as if there was a great Tao God's voice lingering in the void. It was as if there was a supreme primal chaos sovereign chanting scriptures. This great Tao God's voice was actually the primal chaos Tao runes on Jiu Fei's body intertwined with each other and converged together. Jiu Fei's primal chaos Tao resonated with the heavenly Tao. This was the legendary unity of man and nature. At this moment, Jiu Fei was in a mysterious state. Even though he was fighting with the primal chaos god, it was hard for the latter to injure him. Kill. Jiu Fei roared and punched the primal chaos god. His fist did not emit any dazzling primal chaos god light, but the power contained in his fist was absolutely strong. At this moment, the primal chaos god also punched. Boom. The two fists collided with a loud bang. The surrounding void was directly shaken by the violent force, causing cracks in the surrounding void. A ring of transparent ripples spread out from Jiu Fei and the chaotic god's fists, and the surrounding runes were all revealed by the shockwave of the mighty energy ripples. Jiu Fei and the chaotic god used their strength at the same time, and both of them retreated backwards. He stared at the undefeatable existence in front of him, and his eyes lit up even more. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a disdainful sneer. Ultimate strike. Jiu Fei didn't hesitate and immediately used his self-created chaotic fist. As soon as the chaotic fist was used, the void in front of his fist immediately shook. The chaotic god suddenly took a step forward. As he waved his hands, a unique energy wave erupted from his hands, and a primal whirlpool immediately appeared in front of him. Jiu Fei's fist directly smashed into the primal whirlpool, but his entire body remained as still as a mountain. The primal whirlpool could not devour Jiu Fei at all. Boom. A violent fist force erupted in an instant. The chaotic vortex simply couldn't withstand a single blow from Jiu Fei. The force that erupted from the vortex sent Jiu Fei flying. Boom. 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 The chaotic god was also sent flying. Jiu Fei immediately used the Ascension secret technique. In the next moment, a peerless and terrifying aura erupted from his body, shaking the entire world. At this moment, Jiu Fei could clearly feel the unimaginably powerful energy within his body. This energy was still continuously increasing, as if there was no end to it. Shua. Jiu Fei grabbed with his hand, and the primal chaos god in the distance flew towards him. Roar. The chaotic god roared towards the sky. He wanted to break free from the powerful energy enveloping his body, but it was futile. What's going on? The disheveled old man in the void was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. This fella was actually this powerful? At this moment, Jiu Fei seemed to have turned into a huge dragon, and the chaotic god was like an ant. Peng. With a muffled sound, Ji Fei actually grabbed the chaotic god and caused him to explode in the void. Even though the chaotic god was an incarnation of the heavenly Tao imprint, it was extremely realistic. After the chaotic god was grabbed by Ji Fei, he immediately turned into a heavenly Tao imprint and tried to escape back to the heavenly Tao. However, Ji Fei would not allow this heavenly Tao imprint to return to the heavenly Tao so easily. With a grab in the void, the 9 heavenly stars sword appeared in his hand. The moment the 9 heavenly stars sword appeared in his hand, Ji Fei's essence, energy, and spirit were gathered within the sword. Shua. Ji Fei immediately slashed out with his sword. A primal sword light immediately rushed out from the 9 heavenly stars sword in his hand. In an instant, it soared for millions of miles. With a flash of the sword light, the heavenly Tao imprint that soared into the sky was actually cut into 2 and dissipated in the void. What? The disheveled old man in the void of the formation could not help but be moved when he saw that. The sword strike that Ji Fei had just performed was definitely the strongest sword strike that he could perform. As the heavenly Tao imprint dissipated, the primal chaos calamity finally passed. The primal chaos calamity in the sky began to change. At this moment, Ji Fei was sitting cross-legged in the void. The calamity in the sky seemed to have stopped moving, and everything seemed to be calm. The extremely terrifying aura that was released by the supreme heavenly tribulation seemed to have disappeared as well. At this moment, Ji Fei's state of mind actually became very calm, extremely calm. Any thoughts of fighting had completely disappeared, which made him feel that it was inconceivable. At the next moment, his vision turned black and he lost consciousness. At this moment, Ji Fei was sitting in the void motionlessly. No one knew what had happened, not even the disheveled old man. What's going on? What happened? The disheveled old man was in disbelief. This scene seemed familiar. *T, could it be? Suddenly, the disheveled old man's expression changed as he thought of something. The legendary reincarnation calamity? In the reincarnation of heaven and earth, all living things would die one day. Even the supremes who were known to be invincible in the universe would die one day. This reincarnation calamity was way too sick. Throughout history, the reincarnation calamity was extremely rare. However, once one entered the reincarnation calamity, it was extremely difficult to get out. At this moment, it was clear that Ji Fei had encountered the reincarnation calamity. His consciousness had entered a world that seemed to be completely real. Everything here could be passed off as real. To Ji Fei, everything in the reincarnation calamity was real. If he were to lose himself in the reincarnation calamity, he would have failed the calamity and died. Chapter 3782. This is bad. Within the void of the formation, the disheveled old man could no longer sit still. That was because the 7th wave of Ji Fei's heavenly tribulation was the legendary reincarnation tribulation. Even he could not help Ji Fei with it. I told you that it's troublesome to undergo the tribulation here and there's less than a 50% chance of success. But this guy refused to believe it. Now, sigh. The disheveled old man could not help but shake his head with a bitter smile. Even he had only heard of the reincarnation tribulation and did not know about it. By now, Ji Fei might already be trapped in the cycle of reincarnation. No. The disheveled old man clenched his teeth and his eyes lit up like stars. He could not just watch as such a good seedling perishes. No matter how powerful or unparalleled one's skills were, no matter how invincible one was, or how powerful one was, it was all useless in the reincarnation tribulation. Reincarnation could destroy everything. Even if Ji Fei had cultivated the 9 secrets of the immortal Tao, he was still in danger this time round. Of course, the reincarnation tribulation was not invincible. The disheveled old man knew that there was once a reincarnation supremacy in the ancient mythological era. However, it was hard to say if Ji Fei could survive this tribulation. Throughout history, the disheveled old man knew that there was only one supreme reincarnation supremacy. That supreme reincarnation supremacy controlled reincarnation and could send people into it, using the power of reincarnation to destroy their opponents. Even if an supreme supremacy was sent into reincarnation, they would not be able to withstand the power of reincarnation. After all, The Supreme Reincarnation Supremacy was a ruthless character who had once killed a Supreme Supremacy. I'm going to see just how powerful this reincarnation tribulation is. The disheveled old man said and sat down cross-legged. He then channeled his mystic skill to fight against the reincarnation tribulation. At this moment, Ji Fei was pulled into the cycle of reincarnation by the power of reincarnation. As though he had just woken up from a dream, he appeared on a mountain peak. He sat on a huge rock and was absorbing the essence of heaven and earth around him, cultivating diligently. His clothes were drenched in sweat. It's still not working. Ji Fei shook his head, and a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Is this ancient body refining technique really a cultivation technique that is difficult to practice? Master had practiced this method for 100 years, but it was still difficult for him to break through the shackles of cultivation. He was still at the 9th level of heaven, and his lifespan was coming to an end. He was afraid that Master would not be able to escape the end of his lifespan and die of old age in Taishen sect. In the Supreme Mystery sect, only Ji Fei and Master Wen Xiancheng were left. It was this ancient body refinement technique that led to the complete decline of Ji Fei's lineage. Compared to the other 8 lineages of Taishen sect, the lineage of the 8 lineages was becoming more and more prosperous. At that moment, Ji Fei did not know that he was experiencing the samsara tribulation. All of this was a transformation of the samsara force. The power of samsara made it so that the person undergoing the tribulation wouldn't even realize that he was undergoing the tribulation. The person undergoing the tribulation had already been bewitched by the power of samsara. At this time, Ji Fei seemed to have returned to Taishen sect, back to the days before he had obtained the yin-yang jade pendant. The place he was at was Kui Ling Peak, one of the 9 peaks of Taishen. Ji Fei was a disciple of Kui Ling Peak, and the peak leader of Kui Ling Peak was his master, Wen Xiancheng. Wen Xiancheng was a good person in Taishen sect. Being a good person was very disadvantageous, and one would be bullied. Ji Fei was not affected by this character of his master. He was different from his master. He was straightforward, clear about gratitude and resentment, and unyielding. If the disciples of the other 8 lineages were to cause trouble for him, he would not swallow it and would fight with his life. This was Ji Fei. When Ji Fei jumped down from the big stone, several figures immediately rushed over and blocked him in the middle. Dongfang Chen, Wang Yuanji, what do you mean by this? When Ji Fei saw these people, he could not help but be shocked and angry. Haha, what do I mean? I mean to get rid of you. Dongfang Chen laughed loudly and immediately attacked Ji Fei. When the others saw this, they also fiercely pounced towards Ji Fei, as if they really wanted to kill Ji Fei. They did not hold back at all, and Wang Yuanji even used his weapon. At this time, they really wanted to kill him. You all, Ji Fei was shocked. This was Kui Ling Peak, his own territory. How could these guys dare to commit murder here? Were they not afraid of alarming his master? These guys were too bold. They were so brazen to deal with him. Were they crazy? Haha, die. Dongfang Chen and the others laughed crazily, and had no intention of stopping. Dongfang Chen's sword pierced towards the center of Ji Fei's eyebrows. The tip of the sword instantly pierced the center of Ji Fei's eyebrows, and the sword chi hit his face in pain. Roar. Ji Fei roared crazily, and a terrifying wave of power immediately erupted from his body. This kind of extreme danger stimulated his original strength. The instinctive reaction of a martial artist was much stronger than that of an ordinary cultivator. It must be known that martial artists spend their entire life cultivating their martial body. The martial body was the source of their strength. Therefore, Ji Fei would naturally react to danger and would not sit still and wait for death. At this time, Dongfang Chen, Wang Yuanji and the others screamed and were directly sent flying. Then, the scenery around Ji Fei quickly collapsed. What's going on? When Ji Fei saw this scene, he was inexplicably shocked. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he did not know what was wrong. It seemed that he had forgotten a lot of things. At this time, the scenery around Ji Fei was constantly changing. Some blurry scenes quickly flashed in front of his eyes. He seemed to see a pool and a jade pendant. He had a very familiar feeling about these things, as if he had seen them somewhere, but he couldn't remember where he had seen them for a while. The power of the reincarnation tribulation was really powerful, beyond everyone's expectations. Of course, the current Gu Fei did not know that he had just taken a trip to the gates of hell. If he was killed in the reincarnation tribulation, then even if he did not die in reality, he would be seriously injured. At this time, the scene changed. He was now in the virtual sky world, in the stone forest killing formation. Here, Gu Fei met the old tortoise who had been trapped in the stone forest killing formation for countless years and obtained half of the peerless ominous saber here. However, the current Gu Fei had long forgotten all this. For him now, it was his first time coming here. Clang! The sound of iron chains colliding came, making his heart palpitate. He carefully walked in the stone forest, heading toward the sound of the colliding iron chains. When he passed through the stone forest and came to the open space inside, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. He saw half of a bloody black dragon tightly bound in the air by black iron chains. The aura that erupted from this black dragon was extremely terrifying. Although it was only the upper half of its body, the huge dragon's body erupted with a monstrous ominous aura. What's going on? Seeing this scene, Gu Fei was inexplicably shocked. However, he had a very strange feeling that he seemed to have seen a similar scene somewhere before. Raw. Gu Fei wanted to recall carefully, but at this moment, he suddenly had a splitting headache and couldn't help but groan in pain. At this time, a figure directly appeared in front of Gu Fei and directly pounced on Gu Fei. Raw. At the same time, the dragon entangled in the air by the black chains also pounced from the sky. This time, Gu Fei was scared out of his wits. Without any hesitation, Gu Fei made his move. However, in the next moment, he could only watch as he was blasted apart. His consciousness sank into darkness. What? I'm late. This voice rang out in the void. At this moment, in the real world, a crack appeared on the forehead of Gu Fei's real body, who was sitting cross-legged under the tribulation clouds. His body shook violently and his eyelids kept moving as if he could wake up at any time. However, he still didn't wake up. In the end, he didn't move at all, and a stream of blood seeped out from the crack on his forehead. Wake up! At this moment, a loud voice came from the void and reverberated between heaven and earth. This voice contained the power of the great Tao, and it was transmitted directly from the heavenly tribulation. Outside the primogenitor mountain range, the people who were watching the show were shocked. Some of the weaker quasi-supremes actually fell from the sky because of the great Tao divine voice that came from the primogenitor mountain range. What's going on? Everyone was inexplicably shocked. A commotion suddenly broke out outside the primogenitor mountain range. Countless powerful existences couldn't help but be shocked. Even the supremes were shocked. There is indeed a supreme supremacy protecting that person. At this moment, everyone's guess was confirmed. The person undergoing the tribulation in the primogenitor mountain range had invited a supreme supremacy to protect him. It was impossible for the Yingtian patriarch to invite a supreme supremacy. The Wood clan's supreme primogenitor's consciousness incarnation also arrived outside the primogenitor mountain range. They had a deeper understanding of the Yingtian patriarch than anyone else. If the Yingtian patriarch could invite a supreme supremacy, Yingtian sect wouldn't need to rely on the Wood clan and be their slave. Therefore, in the eyes of the Wood clan's experts, the rumor of the Yingtian patriarch undergoing the tribulation was just a lie. Why would Yingtian sect lie? This was a question worth pondering. At this moment, the heavenly tribulation that everyone was watching was still ongoing, and Gu Fei was already at the edge of life and death. The disheveled old man was already panicking. He had no choice but to release the great Tao divine voice in an attempt to wake Gu Fei up. However, Gu Fei had already fallen into the cycle of reincarnation. Even if he shouted at him, he wouldn't wake up. Outrageous, I don't believe it. Extreme Tao Divine Guide, Primordial Spirit Return. Chapter 3783. The reincarnation tribulation was far more terrifying than what the disheveled old man, the god of the mountain and river cauldron, had imagined. Gu Fei's divine sense fell into the cycle of reincarnation. After an indeterminate amount of time, his consciousness finally recovered from the endless darkness. He had been blasted into a bloody mist by the half-black dragon in the stone forest killing formation in the virtual sky world. Although this was an illusion created by the power of reincarnation, it was extremely real. Even Jiu Fei himself thought he was deader than dead. However, Jiu Fei cultivated the Ascension secret technique, one of the 9 secrets of immortal path. With his cultivation level, even if his soul was destroyed, he could still reassemble it and be reborn against the heavens. However, when Jiu Fei woke up, he found himself tied to an altar and surrounded by mysterious people in black cloaks. The sky was dark and the chilly wind was whistling. Jiu Fei was really shocked. What's going on? Jiu Fei struggled fiercely, but the rope that bound him wasn't an ordinary rope. It was a dragon binding rope that could bind a real dragon. The more he struggled, the tighter the dragon binding rope became. At this moment, a voice that sounded like an incantation or sacrificial chant came from below the altar. A man in a black cloak walked up the altar step by step with a stone box in his hand. After the black-robed man walked up the altar, he went straight to Jiu Fei. "What do you want?" Jiu Fei roared at the black-robed man. The black-robed man ignored Jiu Fei and continued to speak in an unknown and mysterious voice. It was an ancient sacrificial chant. At this moment, the black-robed man carefully opened the stone box in his hand. The moment the box was opened, veined patterns emerged on the unremarkable stone box. At the same time, a gust of black aura suddenly rushed out of the stone box and pounced directly at Jiu Fei. A terrifying aura of death spread from the gust of black aura. The spiritual aura of heaven and earth in the surroundings began to frantically gather towards the stone box. Roar! Seeing the black gas rushing towards him, Jiu Fei struggled with all his might, but it was all in vain. The black qi directly rushed into Jiu Fei's body. In the next moment, Jiu Fei's eyes turned blood red and his expression became extremely hideous. The black gas that rushed out of the stone box was actually a primordial spirit that had existed for who knew how many months. That primordial spirit wanted to take over Jiu Fei's body and use this method to defy the heavens and be reborn. This was an ancient ritual, and Jiu Fei was just a sacrificial offering to this ancient existence. At this time, a large amount of information poured into Jiu Fei's mind. This was the memory of this ancient creature, which he obtained from it. This place was actually the ancient city of gods in the virtual sky world. What was happening now was actually something that ancient god city had discovered in the past. No one knew why ancient god city became a dead city and why it appeared in the virtual sky world. This was an ancient secret that even the old tortoise didn't know. Jiu Fei obtained the mountain and river cauldron in ancient god city. He refined the mountain and river cauldron's chaotic origin embryo and opened up his own inner world. He had a lot of karma with ancient god city, so when he crossed the reincarnation tribulation, he actually triggered such a tribulation. At this time, a powerful soul appeared in Jiu Fei's body. Moreover, this ancient soul was devouring Jiu Fei's soul. If he was devoured, Jiu Fei would die. It should be noted that his spirit had already been seriously injured before. Roar! Jiu Fei kept roaring. At this time, the black-robed people around the altar chanted incantations in unison. The power of the ancient incantation enveloped him. This kind of incantation was actually destroying his spirit. This reincarnation tribulation was actually a deity-slaying tribulation. Its purpose was to destroy the spirit of the person undergoing the tribulation, turning the person into a soulless walking corpse. The reincarnation tribulation could trigger the inner demons of the person undergoing the tribulation. This kind of heavenly tribulation was the most difficult to guard against. Dong! Just at this moment, the sound of a bell rang down from the sky. An indescribable power of the great Tao descended and Jiu Fei abruptly woke up. What am I doing? The next moment, everything around Jiu Fei disappeared. The altar, the black-robed people, the mysterious ancient creature's primordial spirit, everything disappeared. It was as if they had never been there. I'm undergoing the tribulation, the extreme supreme tribulation. Jiu Fei's eyes were no longer confused. Reincarnation tribulation? Come, Let me break this reincarnation with one punch. Ji Fei roared at the sky. His long hair danced wildly, and an unprecedentedly powerful battle intent erupted from his body. Brat, this is as far as I can help. At this time, the disheveled old man's voice came from the sky. Thanks a lot, old man. Ji Fei yelled at the sky. He knew that it was truly dangerous earlier on. If his spirit had been destroyed, he would have died for real. The Ascension secret skill could save him once, but it couldn't save him a second time. However, as if responding to Ji Fei, the reincarnation power of heaven and earth exploded all of a sudden. Ji Fei's entire body was suddenly devoured by the collapsing void. The next moment, he realized in shock that he was shrinking. Eventually, he turned into an infant. That was not all. When he snapped back to his senses, he realized that he was in the womb of a pregnant woman. He had not even been born yet. Come from reincarnation and be destroyed in reincarnation. Ji Fei vaguely heard this voice. It was as if he could see a lonely background that was getting further and further away. Before long, Ji Fei, whose battle robes were shining brightly, was sent into reincarnation once again. In this life, his parents were just ordinary hunters who relied on hunting wild beasts in the forest to survive. They lived a comfortable life. This life of Ji Fei's was peaceful. As his father was a hunter, he was naturally one as well. Furthermore, he was the longest-lived hunter. In this life, he lived for more than 90 years before passing away. This was reincarnation. It would turn one into ashes unknowingly and their Tao would disappear. Ji Fei's reincarnation was different with each life. He tragically experienced all sorts of ways to die. He died of old age, was hunted by beasts, drowned, burned to death. Even if he tripped on the road, he could still fall to his death. As the reincarnation went on, the power of Ji Fei's essence spirit gradually weakened. T. In the outside world, the disheveled old man was sweating profusely in the void of the formation. He looked exhausted as though his body had been hollowed out. Ji Fei's true body continued to sit motionlessly under the heavenly tribulation. The terrifying reincarnation power was destroying his spirit. The reincarnation of heaven and earth and all techniques were destroyed. No matter how heaven-defying one's mystique was, it was useless. Eventually, one would be destroyed in the endless reincarnation. Chapter 3784. Although the reincarnation tribulation was powerful, Ji Fei had learned his lesson this time round. No matter how many reincarnations there were, he would only maintain a bit of clarity in his mind so that he would not lose himself in it. Although the logic was simple, the only person who could achieve this was the legendary samsara supremacy. Only by maintaining a bit of clarity in his mind could Ji Fei comprehend the great Tao of reincarnation and eventually master it to become an existence like the samsara supremacy. With a bit of clarity in his mind, he would not be destroyed even after the reincarnation tribulation. In the end, Ji Fei made it through without any mishaps. A samsara seal was imprinted on his essence spirit. Then, the power of samsara dissipated and all the illusions disappeared. Just like that, Ji Fei made it through the reincarnation tribulation. The first half of the tribulation was extremely dangerous. A single misstep could result in the destruction of one's body and essence spirit. However, the second half was much easier. In fact, if not for the fact that Ji Fei had comprehended something, the second half of the reincarnation tribulation would have been even more dangerous. At that moment, Ji Fei, who was sitting cross-legged under the heavenly tribulation, suddenly opened his eyes. Deep in his eyes, a Tao seal was rapidly disappearing. When he made it through the reincarnation tribulation, he had accidentally cultivated the eye of samsara and the power of samsara gathered in his eyes. This mystic power was incredible. As long as he set his eyes on someone, he would be able to send them into samsara and crush them into pieces. Haha, you're Ji Fei indeed. Even the legendary reincarnation tribulation can't do anything to you. The disheveled old man's voice rang in Ji Fei's mind. As long as my heart remains, who can destroy me? Ji Fei said indifferently. Ayo, not bad. It seems like you've comprehended quite a bit after making a trip through samsara, the disheveled old man said. The fact that Ji Fei could make it through the reincarnation tribulation so quickly was beyond his expectations. At that moment, Ji Fei did not say anything else. That was because the eighth wave of the heavenly tribulation was about to arrive. The tribulation clouds that shrouded all directions began to rumble violently again. An unprecedented wave of energy descended from the skies. Rumble, all the mountains on the ground instantly crumbled into dust and dissipated into the void. The entire land was sinking, and it was as terrifying as the end of the world. This, Ji Fei was the first to bear the brunt. He felt as if all the bones in his body were about to shatter. He couldn't even move a finger. He was actually imprisoned in the void. He couldn't help but be shocked and angry. At this time, Ji Fei was shocked to discover that the tribulation clouds in the sky had all turned into grand mist energy. With so much chaos grand mist energy, Ji Fei was pleasantly surprised. If he could swallow this endless amount of grand mist energy, his cultivation and combat strength would definitely increase greatly. At this moment, a huge grand mist hand reached out from the tribulation clouds and slapped down at Ji Fei. The violent power shook the entire world. In the next moment, cracks appeared on Ji Fei's body, as if he could collapse at any time. So powerful. Ji Fei was shocked. In the next moment, he raised his head and looked up into the sky. Seals immediately rushed out from his eyes. Buzz. The void trembled. The grand mist hand that was slapping down from the sky actually disappeared in the void. It was an extremely strange scene. This was the eye of samsara that Ji Fei had just cultivated. With one eye of samsara, the grand mist hand was directly struck into samsara by his eye of samsara. When the disheveled old man in the void saw this scene, he couldn't help but be moved. The mystique that Ji Fei had cultivated was simply too heaven-defying. Even he was jealous. Roar. At this moment, a roar suddenly came from the grand mist energy in the sky. In the next moment, a pitilessly powerful pressure exploded. A terrifying and monstrous pressure descended from the sky, and Ji Fei felt as if his divine soul was trembling. How is this possible? How can there be such a powerful living being at this time? Ji Fei was inexplicably shocked. His eighth wave of extreme supremacy, heavenly tribulation, seemed to be incredible. There seemed to be an unimaginably terrifying existence hidden in the grand mist energy. Such an existence was simply a true extreme supremacy, heavenly tribulation. Then, a figure directly walked out from the grand mist energy in the sky. It was a purple-haired young man. The aura that this young man exuded was very shocking. The purple-haired young man took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Ji Fei. Kill. Ji Fei struck first to gain the upper hand. He immediately used the eye of samsara and looked at the grand mist expert. Reincarnation Tao patterns interweaved in his eyes. The reincarnation force that exploded from Ji Fei's eyes instantly enveloped the purple-haired young man and was about to send him into samsara. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened. The purple-haired young man directly punched out. Then, the reincarnation force that enveloped Ji Fei was actually dispersed. In the next moment, the purple-haired young man's fist had already landed on Ji Fei's body. There's actually someone strong enough to break the reincarnation? Ji Fei was astonished. One should know that this was the reincarnation force. The purple-haired young man was an expert of the great path of primordial chaos. When he went through the tribulation, he left a mark on the heavenly Tao. Although the incarnation of the mark of the heavenly Tao was far from being comparable to the real body, once it went berserk, even Ji Fei would have a headache. This purple-haired young man demonstrated to Ji Fei what absolute strength was. People with such strength were absolutely invincible in the same realm. Ji Fei was continuously blasted away. The violent impact caused blood to seep out of his orifices. The great path of primordial chaos mark of the great path of primordial chaos was too strong. It was hard to imagine that it could suppress Ji Fei with one move. It suppressed Ji Fei to the point where he didn't even have the strength to fight back. Bam! The purple-haired young man punched out directly on Ji Fei's body. In the next moment, Ji Fei's chaotic primordial martial body exploded and turned into a mist of blood. The disheveled old man was dumbfounded. He had never expected that Ji Yufei's martial body would be destroyed by the purple-haired young man right after they exchanged blows. He was so vulnerable. Kill. Ji Yufei's figure appeared again. He roared and attacked the purple-haired young man. 9 rays of heaven-punishing sword light rushed out of his body and pierced towards the purple-haired young man. Every ray of sword light was like a divine rainbow that cut through the void of the world. However, at the next moment, a scene that made Ji Yufei dumbfounded appeared. The purple-haired young man didn't dodge at all and allowed the 9 rays of sword light to hit his body. The 9 extremely sharp heaven-punishing sword light shattered in the void, shattered by the purple-haired young man's body. How is this possible? Chapter 3785. The primordial Great Tao was the strongest Great Tao since ancient times. Those who could obtain the primordial Great Tao were absolutely invincible existences in the myriad worlds. One had to know that even the heavens and earth were born from the primordial Great Tao. Primordial Qi was the ancestral Qi of heaven and earth. It could evolve into all things in the world. Among the 3,000 Great Taos in the myriad worlds, the primordial Great Tao was publicly recognized as the number 1 Great Tao. A primordial sovereign who cultivated the primordial Great Tao was definitely the strongest existence among the extreme Tao sovereigns. At this time, Ji Yufei actually welcomed the primordial Great Tao tribulation. This was different from all the other Great Taos. This tribulation focused on invincibility and supremacy. Ji Yufei's 8th Great Tao tribulation was actually the primordial Great Tao tribulation. Since ancient times, no one had cultivated the primordial Great Tao, not even in the primordial realm. When the primordial Qi surged out from the primordial realm, the extreme Tao sovereign's divine sense clones outside were all dumbfounded. How was this possible? Forget about the 5 elements, yin-yang, and primal chaos tribulations. There were people in the primordial realm who had cultivated these Great Taos before. However, the primordial Great Tao was different. This Great Tao was too heaven-defying. It was a primitive Great Tao. Since ancient times, no one in the primordial realm had grasped this Great Tao. How is this possible? A figure standing high in the sky, shrouded in yin-yang qi, said. This was the yin-yang sovereign from the yin-yang sacred land. This was an incomparably ancient existence that had existed for countless years. As long as the yin-yang sovereign existed, the yin-yang sacred land would not perish. The legendary primordial Great Tao? A sovereign exclaimed. Does he want to become an 8 Tao's sovereign, or even a 9 Tao's sovereign? Impossible, a 9 Tao's sovereign? How is that possible? The divine sense clones of the other sovereigns were all shocked. In the primordial realm, sovereigns also differed in strength. Some sovereigns could only grasp 1 Great Tao in their lifetime. There were very few sovereigns who could grasp 2 Great Taos at the same time. Sovereigns who could grasp 3 or even 4 Great Taos were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilean horns, even in the primordial realm. Sovereigns who grasped 5, 6, or even 7 Grand Taos only existed in legends. 9 Grand Taos was a myth even to the extreme Tao sovereigns of the primogenitor realm. At that moment, Ji Yufei didn't know that he had stunned the extreme Tao supremes of the primordial Great Tao. He was still fighting the purple-haired youth formed by the primordial Great Tao imprint. Kill. Ji Yufei let out a frenzied roar and unleashed the 9 heaven-punishing swords, attacking the purple-haired young man. An even stronger power of the 9 heavenly stars sword erupted from his hand. Even the 9 heavenly stars sword was unable to withstand this power. Cracks appeared on the sword's body, and the divine sword let out a cry. Swoosh. With a single strike of the sword, the void was split apart, the chaos was destroyed, and the primordial chaos was split apart. The power of this sword was already the strongest sword strike that Ji Yufei could unleash. Moreover, the essence of this sword had been completely unleashed by him. Even if the sword slave came personally and unleashed this move, the power of this move wouldn't necessarily be greater than that of Ji Yufei's. This was definitely a divine sword strike. Ji Yufei had attached all his essence, qi, and spirit to this sword strike. However, this supreme sword strike of Ji Yufei was directly broken by the purple-haired youth with a casual wave of his hand. The supreme sword light directly collapsed in the void, turning into a rain of light that dissipated in the void. Upon seeing this, Ji Yufei was taken aback. This fella is way too powerful, isn't he? But then again, this is the primordial Tao brand. This imprint of the primordial great Tao was left behind by a supreme existence that cultivated the primordial great Tao. It was a projection of the supreme existence on the heavenly Tao when he underwent the tribulation. It represented the supreme existence's strongest battle strength when he was in the same realm as Ji Yufei. Since ancient times, there had never been a second person in the primordial great Tao realm that could attract a supreme existence's primordial heavenly tribulation. Therefore, in the primordial realm, even the extreme Tao Supremes didn't know that there was such a person in the primordial realm. Rumble. The purple-haired youth's gaze was like lightning. With a wave of his hand, he charged towards Ji Yufei and directly pierced the space between Ji Yufei's eyebrows. Roar. Ji Yufei roared as he rapidly retreated, leaving behind a series of after-images in the void. His speed was extremely fast. After he stabilized his figure, the hole between his eyebrows rapidly healed. There wasn't a single trace of blood seeping out, but his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. Even though the purple-haired youth's attack didn't threaten his life, it still heavily injured him. This was because a strand of primordial energy had invaded his body and destroyed his vitality. Damn it! Ji Yufei roared and glared fiercely at the purple-haired youth in front of him. A strand of ascension energy erupted from his body and repaired his martial physique. In just an instant, an extremely powerful aura of vitality erupted from Ji Yufei's body, and he was instantly restored to his peak state. Again, Ji Yufei charged forward again, but without any suspense, he was blasted flying by the purple-haired youth once more. The powerful primordial energy directly shattered half of his body. The primordial great Tao that the purple-haired youth displayed was captured by Ji Yufei. Under the observation of his martial path heavenly eye, the purple-haired youth was covered in the primordial great Tao laws. Using the heavenly Tao to supplement one's great Tao, transforming one's great Tao to perfection. Ji Yufei's aura gradually transformed, and so did the primordial energy in his body. The primordial energy that invaded Ji Yufei's body was gradually refined by him. Even though the primordial tribulation was terrifying, there was still a chance of survival. As long as the person undergoing the tribulation grasped this chance of survival, they would have a 50% chance of surviving the tribulation. However, if the person undergoing the tribulation couldn't even grasp this chance of survival, then there was only one outcome for the person undergoing the tribulation: death. The consequences of failing the tribulation were very serious. In the worst-case scenario, one's body and soul would be destroyed, and one's Tao would disappear. If one was lucky, they would be half-dead and their cultivation would be wasted. Ji Yufei's only chance of survival was this purple-haired youth. As long as he wasn't killed, there was hope for him to survive. At this moment, Ji Yufei had already gone crazy. He attacked with all his might, and his eyes were bloodshot. Even so, he still couldn't do anything to the purple-haired youth. Bam! Ji Yufei was once again sent flying by the purple-haired youth. In the next moment, his entire body exploded and turned into a bloody mist. The smell of blood immediately permeated the void. In the next moment, the bloody mist instantly gathered together, and a figure appeared in the void. This person was naturally Ji Yufei. He instantly reformed his physical body, and an extremely overbearing aura erupted from his body. Rumble. The void around Ji Yufei trembled, and there was a thunderous sound. 9 primordial Tao patterns appeared on his body, emitting a powerful aura of the Great Path. Without saying anything, Ji Yufei directly attacked the purple-haired youth. This time, 7 Tao patterns rushed out from between his eyebrows. These 7 Tao patterns instantly turned into 7 Ji Yufeis, and they surrounded the purple-haired youth. These 7 Ji Yufeis all erupted with different powers of the Great Path, and each Ji Yufeis could compete with the purple-haired youth. Boom! A thunderous sound rang out, and a figure that emitted the power of thunder directly attacked the purple-haired youth. In an instant, he turned into an immortal bolt of lightning, and directly blasted the purple-haired youth's body. Violent destructive power erupted in an instant. This was Gu Fei's Thunder Path incarnation. Although the attack of this Thunder Path incarnation was not comparable to the attack of a real Extreme Path Supreme, its power was still shocking. However, facing such a powerful attack, the purple-haired youth did not fight against Gu Fei's Thunder Path incarnation. Instead, he allowed the power of Gu Fei's Thunder Path incarnation to hit his body. In the next moment, the endless lightning directly engulfed the purple-haired youth. Countless destructive lightning wreaked havoc, and when each lightning flashed, it could directly tear the void between heaven and earth, leaving pitch-black spatial cracks. Ha ha, seeing this, Gu Fei could not help but burst into laughter. However, in the next moment, his laughter suddenly stopped, because he saw an unbelievable scene. He saw that the lightning that enveloped the purple-haired youth had directly collapsed. An unimaginably powerful primordial force erupted from the purple-haired youth's body, and it directly shattered Gu Fei's Thunder Path incarnation. At this moment, Gu Fei's 5 elements incarnation charged forward, and the power of the 5 elements rapidly gathered between the hands of Gu Fei's 5 elements incarnation. Buzz! A huge wheel appeared in the void, and it obliterated the purple-haired youth with violent power that shook the heavens and earth. However, the purple-haired youth merely threw a punch, and the 5 elements extermination wheel that was descending from the sky was smashed high up into the sky by his punch. In the next moment, the 5 elements extermination wheel shattered high up in the sky. If anyone else were to see this scene, they would definitely be dumbfounded. Unfortunately, this scene was only witnessed by the disheveled old man. The people outside could only sense the primordial force, but they did not know that Gu Fei, who was undergoing tribulation, was currently embroiled in a great battle. The power of the 5 elements dissipated, and at this time, another of Gu Fei's incarnations made a move. It was a blurry figure that was surrounded by yin and yang qi. Powerful fluctuations of yin and yang qi erupted from this figure, and the yin and yang qi in this world frantically gathered towards him. However, the purple-haired youth still easily broke through Gu Fei's yin and yang incarnation. How is this possible? Gu Fei was almost going crazy. The heavenly Tao brand left behind by the primordial supremacy was actually this powerful. This was simply not going to let anyone live. However, even so, his battle intent was still strong, and he was not the least bit discouraged. His eyes were extremely bright. I want to become an extreme supremacy. Chapter 3786. Could it be that the secret of the Primogenitor Mountains, although the disheveled old man was sitting in the void of the formation, he stared at the purple-haired youth through the heavy power of the formation with a grave expression. Someone in the Primogenitor Mountains had actually cultivated the primordial Great Tao. Even the disheveled old man, a god of the mountain and river cauldron who had lived for countless years and had unparalleled knowledge, couldn't help but be moved. The mountain and river cauldron was only a supreme Tao tool refined by a chaotic supreme. Otherwise, the mountain and river cauldron wouldn't have been able to nurture a chaotic origin embryo. Of course, the chaotic origin embryo nurtured by the mountain and river cauldron had been taken by Gu Fei back in the ancient sacred city in the human realm. Gu Fei used the chaotic origin embryo as a foundation to open up his own inner world. By now, this inner world had already grown into an almost perfect world. At this moment, Gu Fei had already opened up his 3 inner worlds, drawing in an endless stream of heaven and earth essence energy to replenish his exhausted essence energy. The 9 heavenly stars sword in his hand was emitting endless divine light, and there seemed to be a starry sky around the sword blade. The sky blue immortal gold battle armor on his body was also emitting blinding divine light, protecting him in a ball of sky blue divine light. These 2 Tao artifacts had accompanied Gu Fei through many trials and hardships, forcing him to endure the 8th tribulation of the extreme path. Primordial Great Tao was known as the number 1 Great Tao for a reason. At this moment, Gu Fei was in a desperate situation. This was because the purple-haired youth had begun to exert his strength. The power of the primordial Great Tao erupted from his body, shaking the heavens. At this moment, in a valley in the depths of the Primogenitor Mountains, a primordial Tao pattern appeared on the door of an ancient cave abode. Faint roars came from inside the stone door. Boom! The stone door suddenly shook as if something was hitting the stone door and trying to rush out. At this moment, The eyes of the two stone statues on both sides of the stone door suddenly lit up. At this moment, Jiu Fei was undergoing the tribulation and didn't notice the changes in the depths of the primogenitor mountains. Even the incarnations of the extreme Tao Supremes outside the primogenitor mountains didn't notice. Rumble, at this moment, a supreme figure descended from the sky and appeared outside the primogenitor mountain range. An extreme-grade sovereign spirit incarnation dissipated in the void. The moment this figure appeared, the heavens and earth seemed to resound with the divine voice of the great Tao, as if listening to the great Tao. All living beings, except the extreme Tao paragons, were affected. Even the half-supreme beings almost became immersed in it, wishing to capture and comprehend this type of great Tao divine sound. It was because when the divine sound entered their ears, they actually felt a type of enlightenment, as if the clouds and mist were pushed aside to see the clear sky. It was as if all of the difficulties they encountered in cultivation could be easily solved. There was no earth-shattering splendor, nor was there any invincible might. The extreme-grade supreme being that had just arrived stood in the void, yet he gave off an invincible vibe. The figure of this invincible sovereign was blurry as a perfect Daoist rhyme spread from his body. All living beings who sensed this aura felt the urge to bow down and worship him. Boundless life force surged out from this supreme being's body. In the mountain ridges, some withered trees actually sprouted once more, regaining their vitality. The ancestor of the Wood clan is here. Some people were inexplicably shocked, and some experts who had grudges with the Wood clan directly chose to retreat. Old Ghost Moo, I heard that you suffered a great loss not long ago. Is that true? Ha ha. A burst of laughter came from afar. Then, a white figure directly walked over from afar. This person only took one step and instantly arrived nearby. It was a young man in white who was like the wind. His face was like jade, his eyes were like cold stars, and his eyebrows were like swords. He held a feather fan in his hand and wore cloud-treading boots. His sleeves fluttered as if he would fly away with the wind at any time. The young man smiled as he looked at the blurry figure in front of him. There was also a perfect Daoist rhyme on his body, and there was a formless astral wind circling around him. The perfect Daoist rhyme fused with a certain great Tao in the world. As the young man stood there, he was the sky, and he was an omnipotent ruler. This was an extreme-grade supreme being, a perfected great Tao that was above all Taos in the world. His strength alone could contend with the entire world, and he had great divine powers that could destroy the world. Wind Saint, are you tired of living? The ancestor of the Wood clan said coldly. On the blurry figure, two divine lights lit up. Those were the eyes of the ancestor of the Wood clan, and a chilling killing intent erupted from his body. The killing intent of an extreme-grade supreme being was definitely an extremely terrifying thing. The world instantly turned cold. In the sky, the weather changed, and even the great Tao of heaven punishment trembled. Cultivators below the supreme being level were all terrified to the extreme, and even their souls were trembling. Even quasi-supreme beings completely lost the thought of resisting and trembled. An extreme-grade supreme being didn't even need to make a move to make all living beings below the extreme-grade supreme submit. Those who didn't submit would only have one ending, death in body and soul. Of course, there was no existence below the extreme-grade supreme being who could contend with the might of a supreme being. Even those with extremely firm wills and extraordinary existences would have to lower their heads before an extreme-grade supreme being. You want to fight? Anytime. The white-robed young man shrugged nonchalantly. They were all extreme-grade supreme beings, so who was afraid of whom? There was a difference in strength between extreme-grade supreme beings, but it was very difficult to kill an extreme-grade supreme being. Wind Saint, there's no benefit in angering me. The voice of the ancestor of the Wood clan became even colder. Wind Saint, the incarnations of the other extreme-grade supreme beings already knew who it was. It was the ancestor of the Wind clan, the Wind Saint Supreme, who cultivated the great Tao of Wind. The Wind Saint Supreme had arrived personally. At this moment, other than the quasi-supreme beings, the other cultivators all hid as far as they could, not daring to appear in the vicinity at all. Only quasi-supreme beings could barely withstand the aura of the two extreme-grade supreme beings. Cultivators below the quasi-supreme being level couldn't withstand the might of an extreme-grade supreme being at all. Under the might of a supreme being, their souls would collapse. The Wind Saint Supreme still wanted to say something, but at this moment, a loud sound came from the Primogenitor mountain range. Then, a wave of primordial might surged out. The entire heaven and earth was trembling, and even the Primogenitor mountain range was shaking. Mountain peaks were collapsing one after another, and dust rose high into the sky. The Primogenitor mountain range was in chaos. What? Chapter 3787. The primordial Great Tao shocked the Supremes. The might of the primordial Great Tao that surged out from the primordial mountain range shocked all the Supremes outside. How is this possible? When did a Grand Mist Sovereign appear in the Primogenitor realm? Could this be the secret of the Primogenitor mountain range? The group of Supremes could no longer remain calm. One had to know that they had cultivated the Tao for countless years, yet they had never heard of anyone successfully cultivating the primordial Great Tao. The primordial Great Tao was publicly acknowledged as the #1 Great Tao by all the extreme Tao Supremes in the Primogenitor realm. Once one attained the primordial Great Tao, they would be able to move unhindered through the 9 heavens. This was definitely not empty talk. Since ancient times, there had been many cultivators who had embarked on the primordial Tao, but there seemed to be no one who had truly walked to the end. There was once an incomparably stunning existence that cultivated the primordial Great Tao, but he could only cultivate to the quasi-sovereign realm before falling under the extreme sovereign heavenly tribulation. The Grand Tao of primordial chaos was simply too difficult to cultivate to the perfect stage. Most cultivators were unwilling to cultivate the Grand Tao of primordial chaos. Due to that, the cultivation techniques of this Grand Tao were very rare. On the contrary, many creatures in the Primogenitor realm cultivated the 5 elements Great Tao, Yin-Yang Great Tao, Lightning Great Tao, and Wind Great Tao. There were people who cultivated these Great Taos to the extreme and became extreme paragons. In the cultivation history of the ancestral God realm, there was even a paragon of the 5 elements. This was the paragon of the 5 paths, and he was unrivaled in the entire ancestral God realm. However, the 5-element sovereign still disappeared in the end. No one knew where he went. Some people said that he entered the depths of the Primogenitor mountain range and never came out again. Of course, this was only a legend. No one knew what the truth was. When the might of the Grand Mist Grand Tao surged out from the Primogenitor mountain range, these Supremes knew that a Grand Mist Sovereign had appeared in the Primogenitor realm. That was because the fellow in the Primogenitor mountain range was undergoing the extreme grade sovereign tribulation. The heavenly tribulation that the fellow inside had triggered definitely corresponded to a certain extreme grade sovereign. Only by defeating the imprints left behind by the extreme Tao Supremes on the heavenly Tao could one transcend the tribulation and become an extreme Tao supremacy. This was no secret in the Primogenitor realm, especially since there were so many extreme Tao sovereigns in the Primogenitor realm. They had experienced the extreme Tao sovereign tribulation in the past. This is definitely not Ying Tian's tribulation. The wood race's progenitor stared in the direction where the mighty might of the primordial Great Tao was coming from and said coldly, "How do you know?" Wind Saint Supreme said disapprovingly. The Wood Clan progenitor ignored the Wind Saint Supreme. At this moment, he had a bad premonition, as though a great calamity was about to befall him. This was an instinctive reaction of an extreme Tao Supreme being. It was the premonition of an extreme Tao Supreme being towards an unknown threat. Only an extreme supremacy would have such a mysterious feeling. Even a quasi-supremacy wouldn't have such an extraordinary premonition. Could it be that the fellow undergoing tribulation inside has karma with me? The Wood ancestor was in disbelief. With his current cultivation, there were no more than 3 existences that could threaten him in the ancestral realm. The Wind Saint Supreme was naturally not one of the 3 supreme experts. Just as the Wood Clan's primogenitor was in a state of bewilderment, another extreme Tao aura appeared in the vicinity. An extreme Tao sovereign's true body had personally arrived. Even though he had already restrained his aura, his arrival still alarmed everyone. Even if there was only a wisp of the extreme Tao aura, it could crush the world and make billions of living beings tremble. At this moment, Ji Yufei didn't know that his extreme Dao heavenly tribulation had alarmed so many extreme Dao sovereigns in the ancestral realm, and even the true body of an extreme Dao supreme had arrived. Currently, Ji Yufei was fighting with his life against the purple-haired youth formed by the heavenly Dao brand. However, even though he was fighting with his life on the line, it seemed that he was still being suppressed by the other party. The purple-haired youth was simply too powerful. With the primordial great Dao, he was almost invincible in the world. However, there was still a chance of survival in the unseen world. Ji Yufei keenly captured this chance of survival and struggled to hold on. Bam! The purple-haired youth casually waved his sleeve and Ji Yufei was immediately swept into the sky by a powerful primordial force. In the next moment, his martial body directly exploded in the void. A shrill mist of blood appeared in the void. However, in the next moment, the mist of blood gathered together and a figure shrouded in primordial qi appeared. The powerful aura that erupted from the figure caused the surrounding void to tremble. Ji Yufei instantly condensed his martial body again. Moreover, he was constantly refining primordial qi and using it to temper his martial body so that it could evolve towards the ultimate realm of primordial Dao. He wanted to cultivate his martial body to the perfect extreme Dao primordial martial body. If he could cultivate such a martial body, Ji Yufei's martial body would be able to exist for eternity. Even if his spiritual soul was destroyed, his martial body would still be preserved. After countless years, this martial body might be able to regain its consciousness and come back to life. How can he be so strong? Old man, come out and help. Ji Yufei stared at the powerful and terrifying figure and said loudly. He knew that the disheveled old man could hear him. What's the hurry? The disheveled old man said unhurriedly. You might not be in a hurry, but I am, Ji Yufei said in annoyance. At this moment, the purple-haired young man made his move again. He waved his hands and formed a seal with his palms. A primordial seal immediately appeared in front of him. The purple-haired young man waved his hand and the primordial seal immediately flew towards Ji Yufei at an extremely fast speed. This time, Ji Yufei used the 8 desolation steps and moved over 100 feet to dodge the purple-haired young man's attack. He then threw a punch at the purple-haired young man. Ji Yufei's fist technique had changed. As he threw a punch, a violent force immediately surged into his fist and surged towards the purple-haired young man. This was a battle technique that evolved from the 5-element fist and then the chaos fist. It was a unique technique that Ji Yufei had created himself. Ji Yufei had always wanted to create his own martial arts battle technique. One must know that even the cultivation techniques and battle techniques left behind by the martial ancestor were incomparable to his own. At Ji Yufei's level, what he needed to do was to destroy all the battle techniques that belonged to others and create his own battle technique. That was because the battle technique that he created was the most suitable for him. But now, Ji Yufei still had to use the cultivation techniques and battle techniques created by other extreme grade supremes to survive. He had to survive and become an extreme grade supremacy. Bam! In the face of Ji Yufei's extremely violent punch, the purple-haired young man casually extended his right hand and blocked the punch. Chapter 3788. Ji Yufei's 8th tribulation had reached the most critical juncture. If he could make it through, he would only be a step away from the extreme grade realm. However, it was not an easy task. Even though Ji Yufei was extremely powerful and had made all the necessary preparations, he was still in a desperate situation. Although the purple-haired young man was only a manifestation of the heavenly Dao imprint, this manifestation was too powerful. It could absolutely crush any opponent in the same realm. From this, Ji Yufei already knew how powerful the owner of the heavenly Dao imprint was in the past. It was hard to imagine that such a powerful existence existed in this world. Even if it was just an incarnation, it could easily injure Ji Yufei and cause him to explode. The primordial combat physique displayed by the purple-haired young man was unimaginably powerful. Even when facing Ji Yufei's 9 heaven-punishing swords, he was unscathed. The primordial combat physique was invincible. Against such an opponent, an ordinary quasi-supreme would have knelt down. However, Ji Yufei had always become stronger when facing the strong. In his eyes, there was no mountain that he could not climb, no sea that he could not cross, and no enemy that he could not conquer. At this time, the sound of bones vibrating came from Ji Yufei's body. The cracked bones in his body were healing rapidly. In just an instant, all the injuries on Ji Yufei's body were completely healed. The aura on his body was even stronger than before he was injured. In his eyes, although his opponent was powerful, he was still a whetstone for him. Boom! 9 quasi-sovereign grade Dao patterns rushed out from Ji Yufei's body and revolved around him. Every single Dao pattern was like a world of its own, and the vast and mighty great Dao energy that was emitted seemed to be able to crush the entire world. Among the 9 divine patterns of the great path around Ji Yufei, there were thunder, wind, fire, 5 elements, yin-yang, chaos, and reincarnation. The 7 divine patterns of the great path exuded a particularly powerful aura that was almost perfect. As for the other 2 Dao patterns, they were much weaker. The primordial divine patterns were gradually perfecting themselves. Take this, 7 Daos 1. Ji Yufei let out a furious roar. The 7 Dao seals, sky thunder, earth fire, wind, 5 elements, yin-yang, chaos, and reincarnation immediately flew in front of him. At this time, Ji Yufei's entire body was filled with vast and mighty chaos grand mist energy. It was extremely strenuous, and his hands felt as if they were carrying the weight of 7 heavens and earth. The purple-haired youth did not make a move. Instead, he quietly waited for Ji Yufei to gather his strength. Even though he was an incarnation formed from a heavenly Dao brand, the purple-robed young man still had his pride. Rumble, in front of Ji Yufei, the 7 seals were vibrating, and the 7 powers of the great path were intertwining. The strength of the power that erupted soared. Although the 7 Dao seals did not truly merge into one, when the 7 Dao seals gathered together, the power of the 7 Daos was extremely powerful. At this moment, Ji Yufei's forehead was filled with sweat. If the purple-haired young man were to make a move now, he would definitely be blasted into a mist of blood. Go! Ji Yufei let out a furious roar and pushed both his hands forward. The 7 Dao seals formed a celestial sphere of divine radiance that blasted towards the purple-haired young man. The entire heaven and earth seemed to be collapsing. Wherever the celestial sphere of divine radiance passed by, the void would constantly shatter. The power of the 7 Daos seemed to be able to destroy everything. The fluctuations of the power of the 7 Daos even broke through the seal of the heavenly tribulation and spread outside, which was sensed by the extreme Dao Supremes outside. At this time, many extreme Dao Supremes appeared outside the Primogenitor mountain range. These extreme Dao Supremes had descended in their true bodies and were no longer incarnations of their spiritual will. The reason why the extreme Dao Supremes were able to descend in their true bodies was naturally because Ji Yufei's extreme Dao Supremacy heavenly tribulation was so powerful that even the extreme Dao Supremes could not sit still. It's the power of the 7 great paths. Could it be that the fella inside wants to become a 7 Dao Supremacy? An extreme Dao Supremacy exclaimed in shock. One must know that the 7 Dao Supremacy was a legendary existence even in the Primogenitor realm. 7 Dao's supremacy. When the Wood Clan's primogenitor heard this, he could not help but frown. He had an inexplicable feeling that a great disaster was about to befall him. At this time, facing Ji Yufei's ultimate attack, the purple-haired youth was still expressionless. When the ball of divine radiance blasted in front of him, he extended his right hand unhurriedly and pressed forward. Bam! The purple-haired youth's right hand collided with the ball of divine radiance and a muffled sound was heard. In the next moment, with a loud bang, the 7 divine radiance actually exploded. A ball of colorful light of the great path spread out and the purple-haired youth's entire right arm was instantly shattered in the void. His entire body was sent flying. The mighty power of the 7 Daos engulfed the heavens and the earth. The void that was enveloped by the power of the 7 Daos was directly turned into nothingness. It was extremely terrifying. The tribulation clouds in the sky were shaken and a small half of them were directly blown away. High up in the sky, the weather changed and the tribulation clouds were vast and mighty, as if someone was splitting the sky and earth apart. In the end, the power of the 7 Daos completely intertwined and collided with each other, instantly increasing the destructive power by a few levels. Even the purple-haired youth was in a sorry state at this time. At this time, Jiyu Fei went all out. He directly opened his mouth and inhaled, actually devouring the primordial aura in the world into his body. In the next moment, the sound of wind and thunder came from his body. The primordial Tao seal on his body instantly became bright, smelting with powerful Daoist rhymes, as if it had suddenly come to life. This was the meaning of passing the tribulation, using the heavenly Tao to make up for one's shortcomings. In this way, one's Tao would transform into a flawless great path, which was also the so-called extreme Tao. However, this was still not enough. If Jiyu Fei wanted to transform his primordial Tao to the extreme, it was still far from enough. Die. Without hesitation, Jiyu Fei directly attacked the purple-haired youth. He directly rushed through the extremely chaotic power of the 7 Taos. The power of the 7 Taos frantically gathered towards him. In that attack just now, he had successfully seized a small part of the primordial heavenly law. Because the purple-haired youth had not been blasted back to the heavenly Tao, he still could not obtain the complete primordial heavenly law. With the addition of the 7 Taos power, Jiyu Fei seemed to have turned into 7 Taos of war. In an instant, he was in front of the purple-haired youth. Boom! With a wave of his hand, Jiyu Fei blasted out the power of wind and thunder. The power of the great path of wind and thunder was vast and mighty. Immediately, countless wind and thunder Tao patterns appeared in the void. The overwhelming wind and thunder Tao patterns bombarded the purple-haired youth. The power of wind and thunder instantly filled every inch of the void. At this time, the purple-haired youth only had his left arm left. A small part of the right side of his body had turned into flying ash. The power of the 7 Taos was too powerful. The purple-haired youth was still expressionless. He circled his left hand in front of him, and a vortex immediately appeared in the void. In the next moment, a terrifying devouring power surged out from the vortex. Rumble! The entire heaven and earth seemed to be swallowed by the vortex. The overwhelming power of wind and thunder that bombarded the area was directly swallowed into the vortex. The purple-haired youth's right body was trembling, and his shattered right arm was actually gradually recovering. What? You want to borrow my power to heal your injured body? Seeing this, Jiyu Fei couldn't help but be shocked. It took him so much effort to injure this guy. If he allowed this guy to recover, wouldn't he be in trouble? Dissolve. Jiyu Fei directly displayed the secret word void, one of the 9 secrets of immortal path. In the next moment, the endless power of wind and thunder immediately dissipated into nothingness. Even the vortex in front of the purple-haired youth was turned into nothingness by the power of the secret word void. Even the purple-haired youth's figure became a blur. However, this was only for a moment. The purple-haired youth was too powerful. Even the secret word void couldn't hurt him. His figure only blurred for a moment before it solidified again. In the face of absolute power, any secret skill was trash. Even the secret skills created by supreme masters were the same. As long as one had absolute power, any secret skill could be broken with a single punch. This guy is very similar to me. At this time, Jiyu Fei suddenly felt like he was a fellow talent. The purple-haired youth was powerful and invincible, and so was he, who pressed forward with indomitable will. At this time, Jiyu Fei had no time to think about this, because a fist was rapidly enlarging in his eyes. Boom! The 2 fists collided in an instant, and 2 extremely powerful forces erupted at the same time. Jiyu Fei only felt his body tremble. The primordial great path power that he gathered was almost blown apart. His entire body was greatly shaken, and his spirit was shaken. Roar! Jiyu Fei roared. The next moment, the 9 Tao patterns reappeared, and his spirit stabilized. The force that impacted his body was also refined and devoured by him. In the next moment, an even more powerful force erupted from the purple-haired youth's fist. This punch seemed to be able to blow apart all the great paths at once. Without any suspense, the purple-haired youth suppressed all the great paths with a single punch. He was still as powerful, invincible, and indomitable as ever. Jiyu Fei was sent flying tens of thousands of feet away, crashing into the formation set up by the disheveled old man. The Supreme Killing Formation could not withstand Ji Yufei's collision, and yet another Supreme Killing Formation was destroyed by Ji Yufei. That caused the disheveled old man's eyebrows to twitch. That was a killing formation that he had painstakingly set up. Yet, it was destroyed by this fella before he could even use it. The disheveled old man was extremely frustrated. This won't do if I want to kill this fella. Countless cracks appeared on Ji Yufei's body. His face and arms were covered in them. However, those cracks disappeared rapidly. A single Dao suppresses all Daos, using the power of a single Dao to shock the Daos in the heavens. Ji Yufei muttered to himself. He glared at the figure that was approaching him step by step from afar. Thoughts flashed through his mind, perhaps he could give it a try as well. Chapter 3789. The combat prowess of the great path that the purple-haired young man displayed shocked Ji Yufei, but he was also inspired. The purple-haired young man walked on a different path. The purple-haired young man only cultivated one great path, which was the primordial great path. However, this great path was much stronger than any first path sovereign, second path sovereign, or even fifth path sovereign. If the purple-haired young man hadn't fallen, he would definitely be an invincible existence in the ancestral realm. Other extreme path sovereigns could only bow down to him. Boom! At this moment, the purple-haired young man's body erupted with unprecedented power of the primordial great path. His entire body was emitting the primordial light of the great path. Even his hair and eyebrows were shining. Even a strand of hair that fell from his body could cut through the ages. Any great path was a joke before the purple-haired young man. Even the power of samsara couldn't do anything to this supreme existence. He was almost indestructible. The purple-haired young man's right arm, which had been shattered by Ji Yufei's power of 7 paths, was growing back at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was definitely not a good thing for Ji Yufei. Ji Yufei wasn't as confident as the purple-haired young man. He wouldn't allow the purple-haired young man to increase his cultivation. He roared and pounced at the purple-haired young man. Buzz! The void trembled. 9 great Dao runes rushed out of his body and turned into Dao seals. They gathered on his right hand. The 9 Dao seals released the power of the great path that shook the heavens and earth. The 9 Dao seals condensed into a star on Ji Yufei's right hand. 9 types of Dao power intertwined, and the Dao power that erupted was much stronger than the power of the 7 paths as one. However, the only flaw was that the primordial great Dao and the last Dao seal were much dimmer than the other 7 Dao seals. This was especially so for the last Dao seal. It was completely dim. The last Dao seal was crucial to Ji Yufei because it was his last tribulation. Without a doubt, the last Dao seal determined whether or not Ji Yufei could successfully pass the extreme path sovereign heavenly tribulation. Once he succeeded, he would become the strongest 9 path sovereign in the ancestral realm. Of course, Ji Yufei might not necessarily want to be a 9 path sovereign. At this time, everything could change. In Ji Yufei's hand, 9 seals converged, and a terrifying power of the great path erupted. His right palm seemed to be holding a perfect big world. 9 types of Dao energy interweaved, as if they were opening up a large world. Without any hesitation, Ji Yufei arrived in front of the purple-haired youth. The power of the 9 paths in his right hand blasted towards the purple-haired youth. Buzz! In the next moment, the space in front of Ji Yufei's palm suddenly darkened, and then the entire space collapsed and was obliterated. Even the purple-haired young man had been struck into the chaotic void. The power of the 9 Daos as one was too strong. Even the primogenitor's realm couldn't withstand it. Ji Yufei blasted a huge black hole out. Even if the purple-haired youth had a heaven-defying physique like the primordial battle body, he would still be injured by Ji Yufei's attack that contained the power of the 9 Daos. There was a huge hole in his chest, but no blood seeped out. At this level of cultivation, all the essence, qi, and spirit in one's body had merged into one. Blood couldn't be casually lost. It should be known that every drop of blood from such an existence could kill a holy venerate, and a single strand of hair could destroy the void. Roar! The purple-haired youth roared. Terrifying primordial force erupted from his body, and a primordial seal appeared between his eyebrows. The primordial seal communicated with the heavenly path and drew in the primordial force of the heavenly path. The primordial force of the heavenly path was not cultivated by living beings. Instead, it was a kind of heavenly path power formed by the world. The power of the great path that humans cultivated was known as the power of the mortal path. The so-called unity of heaven and man was the fusion of the power of the heavenly path and the power of the mortal path into a flawless great path. From the moment a cultivator stepped onto the path of cultivation, they had to fight against the heavens, against men, and against all living beings. Every path of cultivation was difficult. Most people would never reach the end. Throughout the ages, there were only a handful of people who managed to walk to the end of the path of cultivation in the myriad of worlds. At this moment, the purple-haired youth drew in the primordial force of the heavenly path. In the next moment, his right arm, which had been shattered by Jiu Fei's power of 7 Daos, instantly recovered, and the bloody hole in his chest disappeared. In just an instant, the purple-haired youth recovered to his peak state. The aura that erupted from his body was extremely powerful, and it seemed to be even stronger than before. Very well. Let's fight to the death. Jiu Fei roared furiously at the sky, and his voice shook the chaotic void. At the same time, his aura skyrocketed. He didn't dare to be careless, and the power of the heavenly path was fully unleashed. Victory or defeat would depend on this battle. If he defeated the purple-haired youth with the primordial force of the heavenly path, he would be able to successfully pass the 8th extreme path sovereign tribulation. If he was defeated by the purple-haired youth, the consequences would be dire, and he might even die. Level 10 Heavenly Ascension Force. Jiu Fei went all out as well. He was going all out. 9 Dao seals circled around him, and the Dao light that erupted was incomparably dazzling, illuminating the chaotic void. Primordial annihilation. At this moment, a faint voice rang in Jiu Fei's mind. The purple-haired youth seemed to have come to life, and he threw a punch at Jiu Fei. It was a simple punch that seemed to be full of flaws. However, in Jiu Fei's eyes, it was this extremely simple punch that was full of flaws. He actually had a feeling that he didn't know how to dodge it. What? His shock was by no means insignificant. His opponent's punch could absolutely be said to be a punch that transformed something rotten into something magical. It seemed to be filled with flaws, yet it was actually the embodiment of the primordial Grand Tao that was displayed to the extreme. What did it mean to destroy all techniques with a single punch? This was the primordial Great Tao. Such a simple punch was enough to destroy all techniques and annihilate all powerful enemies. However, it was a pity that Jiu Fei was also walking the path of the strongest. He pressed forward with no path of retreat. Jiu Fei also threw a punch. This punch was very slow, as though it was in slow motion. However, it revealed an invincible might. This was definitely a tit for tat. The purple-haired youth's primordial Great Tao was going head-on against Jiu Fei's invincible fist. Both of these were known to be invincible battle techniques. However, who was stronger and who was weaker would only be known after a fight. There were many people who claimed to be unrivaled, but there were very few who were truly unrivaled. Even an extreme-grade supremacy who claimed to be unrivaled in the myriad of worlds was hard to say if they were truly unrivaled. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. It was as though an endless amount of time had passed. The two fists finally collided. At that moment, an immortal divine light of the Great Tao flashed through the chaotic void. This divine light of the Great Tao directly tore apart the chaotic void and the extreme path tribulation clouds that shrouded all directions. It directly rushed out of the void that was enveloped by the extreme path tribulation. It was like a terrifying lightning flashing through the void. In the next moment, more than a dozen clouds of blood exploded outside the primordial mountain. Wherever the divine light of the Great Tao passed, more than a dozen unlucky spectators outside the primordial mountain did not even have time to scream before they turned into blood mist. Their bodies and souls were directly destroyed. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. Many of the unlucky people who were swept by the divine light of the Great Tao and turned into blood mist were quasi-supremes. Even quasi-supremes were as weak as ants in front of the divine light of the great Tao that rushed out from the heavenly tribulation. The power of this divine light of the great Tao was too strong. How is this possible? Some people's faces turned pale. Some people directly retreated. No one wanted to die. It should be known that cultivating to the quasi-supreme realm was not an easy thing. As long as supremes did not appear, quasi-supremes were invincible. Even if they were not invincible in the primordial realm, they would absolutely be invincible in other worlds. The major forces of the primordial realm all ruled over many other worlds. In the eyes of the major forces of the primordial realm, other worlds were just their hunting grounds. When the prey matured, it was time for the major forces of the primordial realm to hunt. However, something major happened recently that even the major figures of the primordial realm were shocked. In the worlds that were ruled by the major forces of the primordial realm, powerful creatures that could threaten the hunters began to appear. Just when even the supremes outside were shocked, the outcome of the battle between Ji Yufei and the purple-haired youth had already been decided. From Ji Yufei's fist to his arm, then the right half of his body, and in the end, his entire body gradually turned into ashes and dissipated in the void. In the instant that Ji Yufei's head turned into ashes, a ball of soul divine light also dissipated in the void. Ji Yufei was actually turned into ashes by the purple-haired youth's punch. Even his soul dissipated in the void. This was the most thorough way to die. He could not even become a ghost anymore. This, the disheveled old man sitting in the void of the formation couldn't help but be shocked when he saw this. Could it be that Ji Yufei could not survive this tribulation and ended up dying? At this moment, a strange sound rang out from the purple-haired young man's body. Cracks began to appear on his body, like countless cracks had appeared on the most exquisite porcelain. Bam! The purple-haired youth exploded in the end, collapsing into countless fragments. These fragments were all shining, and endless divine light of the great path rushed out from them. They gathered together and turned into a dim seal. Then, it tore through the sky and rushed out of the chaotic void. The primordial seal of the great path directly rushed into the tribulation clouds in the sky and then returned to the heavenly way. Was this a lose-lose situation? However, Ji Yufei had already been destroyed, while the purple-haired youth had turned into a seal and returned to the heavenly way. It seemed like the heavenly way imprint was still superior. In the void of the formation, the disheveled old man could not sit still anymore. However, was Ji Yufei really dead in both body and soul?